Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing and advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489. Extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. Moving on to a call to order. I'd like to ask committee members any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I see none. I'd like to move on to the election of the vice chair for the term ending November 14, 2022. Committee, I'd like to see how you'd like to proceed. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to put Sean Lewis forward for that position.
And I think I'd like to go around to all committee members. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to say that I appreciate Councillor Lehman's support. However, and I did indicate at SPPC when we were selecting chairs that I was going to support you and withdraw my name from that. Since then, I've taken on the chair of the Corporate Services Committee, and so in fairness to give others an opportunity, I'd prefer someone other than myself take the vice chair role on for this committee.
Okay, so I'll go to other committee members. Councillor Turner.
No good deed should go unpunished, so I'll nominate Councillor Lehman.
Are there any other nominations from the committee? I see none. I guess I'll look for a seconder, and I see a seconder in Councillor Lewis. And with that, I will go to Councillor Lehman. Councillor Lehman.
Well, I will just say thank you to Councillor Turner for your faith in me, and I'll let my name stand.
And with that, I think we can go to vote on our vice chair.
Scribe, I would like to vote yes, please.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Congratulations, Councillor Lehman, for being vice chair. I look forward to handing over the chair to you. And I would also like to, acknowledge Councillor Stephen Turner. Welcome to planning. It's good to see you back again. And with that, I would like to move on. Just before I do, I would like to, if I may, committee, just to acknowledge the 2022 Urban Design Awards have been presented, and I just want to acknowledge Britt O'Hagan and her team and for the great work that they had done, as well as the jury. I had the honor of being part of this jury, and I found it such an exciting time being at planning and we see the paperwork with these applications, but it is really quite fascinating when you go to these buildings and see them in our communities. And it was an honor to be part of the jury, and also the expertise that the jury has. It was a learning experience for me, listening to all the professional comments as we toured the different buildings. So if you have not seen the virtual award ceremony, I would definitely encourage you to do so. And thanks again to staff for the work that they did. Mayor Holder, I'll go to you next.
Thanks. Only to add my congratulations to all the award recipients and all the nominees. I was going to say too, Chair, the challenge of being a jurist, a judge, is that everybody loves you coming in, but a lot less do going out. But congratulations for doing it to you and all the other folks who made the commitment to be jurists.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. And with that, I'd like to move on to the consent items. Are there any items that the committee members wish to either pull? I see none, so I will look for a motion. Mayor Holder?
I wonder if I could pull 2.6, please.
Okay, and with that, are there any other committee members that would like to pull any? I see none, so I am looking for a motion to approve the rest of the consent items. Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Before we go to vote, I think, are there any comments from committee members that they would like to make on the items? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just trying to pull the right item right here, and I can't grab it, but one of them is the identification that the city has no interest in a parcel that had been set aside for schools. It is in the north end of the city, north of Fanshawe Park Road. It is a little bit further east than the discussion that we had at council previously, where a school site was required, but I'm kind of curious why this site may not have been at least partially suitable for the school board, given their scarcity of lands and opportunities to provide a school site in the north.
Yes, with that, I'll go to staff to, if they've got any comments to Councillor Turner's questions. I think this is the one on 613 Superior Drive, just 2.9.
Through you, Madam Chair. The plan of subdivision came through and it was circulated to all 4 school boards, all of which declined them. And it came as well to the city for their opportunity to acquire the lands. And it was subsequently, as the report's laid out in front of you, there wasn't a desire for these lands. We have, Mr. Felberg might be able to speak a little bit more, but we have set up a task force with the school boards to assist them with identifying upcoming school sites or identify their needs for school lands. So we'll be proceeding with that in the future.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Page, and through you, Madam Chair. I suppose that was a bit of an unfair question for staff because it was kind of placing a question of the school board on the civic staff. But I think what this, it was more commentary perhaps, is that this there is a process. It was nice to hear actually from Mr. Page that that a task force is being set up to address these issues. The fact that this parcel came up and was not optioned in such short proximity to the issue that we had just only a couple months or a few months ago really surprised me, I guess, and especially since it was lands in the north for school opportunities. So I hope the task force is able to help address these concerns in the future, and I don't have any objection to what's being proposed in the consents. Thanks.
Thank you. I see. Are there any other comments on other items? Councillor Lehman?
I just want to echo Councillor Turner's frustration because, I think we, in that last debate, we did express, we have 2 organizations that, unfortunately, just the way that things work are not in sync on planning and can lead to contentious issues down the road. And I just hope that this particular parcel doesn't pop up in the next couple of years and woulda, shoulda, coulda. But again, that's with the board and their challenges they have. So I'm glad to see the city reaching out and having some sort of dialogue through the task force to do what we can, given, the restrictions placed on us and the school board by the province. So, yeah, I just wanted to echo Councillor Turner's frustration there.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lehman. And I see no other comments from committee, so if we can proceed with voting on the consent items with the exception of 2.6.
Chair will vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I'd like to move on to 2.6, which is the transit-oriented secondary plan prioritization. This was pulled by Mayor Holder. Mayor Holder?
Thanks very much. Question to staff, if I can. I look at the secondary plan prioritization, and when I reviewed it, I recall the last time we had a discussion, and if you recall, one plan at Oxford intersection was very much forefront, and then it was decided that Wellington Road, by virtue of the gateway and development in that area and the fact that it's a transit corridor, should have priority. We all agreed with that. But I see it reasonably prominent on the list as item 4 there. And so my question to staff is why it's on the, I don't know the timing of when this would come up, but we don't have huge redevelopment there that I see, nor rapid transit on the Four Corners, but I still see it there. So I'm just trying to get a sense to, through you, Chair, to staff, why it's prioritized. I think that's highly, but I could stand to be corrected on that.
And just for further clarification, Mr. Mayor, this is number 4, then, the Transit Village place type at Oxford and Wonderland?
That's correct. Page 72 for colleagues.
So if I can go to staff, questions around the timelines and why it's here?
Yes, this is Britt O'Hagan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So we have, so the direction was to report back and prioritize the Wellington corridor first and foremost, and then following that, also prioritize the transit village place types. So as you know, Masonville has recently been completed. So in order of priority, we did focus on White Oaks and then the Highbury, Oxford area. The pieces that were missing in that transit village to complement the London Psychiatric Hospital lands that already have a secondary plan. And then the 4th priority being the Oxford and Wonderland transit village. So we wanted to highlight that those transit villages would be the kind of 2nd to the 4th priority coming up. As the report mentions, these plans are will move forward kind of based on, we do have dedicated staff resources to develop these plans, and some of them may go concurrently. So we may be dealing with multiple secondary plans at any given time. I would say that the for the 4 areas identified as priorities, we would look probably around a 5 or 6 year time frame for all of those to be completed, I would assume, and that's all really based on other emerging priorities and emerging issues that come up as well.
Mayor Holder.
Sorry, Chair. You probably can't hear me. I'm trying to get.
I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. Thank you.
Yep, and I can see you too.
Well, that's too bad for you, but I'm glad you can hear me at least. Chair, the staff, thank you to staff. They answered my question with respect to timing as well with regard to these, and I needed to have a sense of that as well. The fact that some may be considered concurrently, we'll deal with that as it is, but thank you for the answers. That's helpful to me.
I'd like to go to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to ask this in consent, but since it was pulled, I want to ask it now because it's still relevant to me in terms of the east part of London and the East London Link development. First of all, I will say to staff, thank you for making the Wellington Gateway areas, both of them priorities. I think that that was absolutely essential and was one of the reasons that we provided this direction at council previously. But I'm concerned in the report that the East London link is mentioned only in terms of the London Psychiatric Hospital lands. It references the area from Roehampton to 2nd Street and recognizes that that is on a rapid transit corridor, and particularly coming out of a recent decision at planning and then at council to refuse an application in that area because of the density and the issues that were raised about sanitary sewer capacity and all of those things. I'd like to hear from our staff why that area isn't on the list already, because what we heard on a recent application is that there definitely needs to be a consideration of a secondary plan in that area, not just mention that it needs some consideration in the future.
Yes, through the chair, this is Britt O'Hagan again. The direction back was to prioritize kind of the Wellington corridor and then the transit villages. The report, as you mentioned, does mention that there are some kind of segments along the East London link that should be evaluated further. We didn't think that these areas were particularly large enough to definitely warrant a secondary plan, but they are areas that we could examine through some of those other studies or in separate studies outside of this to kind of evaluate the missing pieces along Dundas Street in the East London link, as well as the Oxford piece going out to Fanshawe. So we anticipate that those could be considered within kind of the Highbury Oxford Transit Village consideration, because we aren't necessarily bounded by these place type boundaries for the secondary plans. We would look to kind of look at the surrounding area as well. So those could definitely be included and evaluated during those processes.
Councillor Lewis.
So that's great to hear, and I won't belabor the point too much. I'll continue a conversation offline with staff about this because I think it's really important. But I did want to ask, because I didn't get the sense from the Wellington Gateway proposed areas, and so perhaps through you, Chair, Ms. O'Hagan can expand on her answer just a little bit. Are these areas that we're looking at right now influenced or particularly limited by what we heard on that planning application that I referenced earlier about the 100-meter radius from the transit village locations? So was that a limiting factor in these secondary plan areas? Hearing that you certainly are open to consideration of areas adjacent to those, but was that one of the factors that weighed in on this?
So through the chair, the locations or the corridors and general locations of the villages were selected based on the place types. In the London plan, it does identify which areas of the city might warrant secondary plans, and it specifically mentions the rapid transit villages and the rapid transit corridors, as well as urban corridors. Through the terms of reference and the kind of initial study of these areas when initiating a secondary plan, we would be looking at the surrounding area as well to kind of evaluate if there's any adjacent neighborhoods or other place types that would need additional policy related to them to kind of deal with some of those issues of transition or consolidation of lots and other planning applications such as that. So we would be looking at surrounding areas when we do the studies. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question.
It does actually, through the chair. Thank you, Ms. O'Hagan. And as I indicated, I'll continue a more in-depth conversation with yourself and other members of staff when it's appropriate offline. I recognize that this is a ways down the road in terms of when the study would actually commence, and so there's time to have those discussions. It's not something that we need to hammer out at tonight's meeting, and I'm generally quite supportive of the prioritization list as it's been brought forward. So thank you for providing those clarifications, and I'll be making myself a note to follow up and set a time to chat with you further about this in greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Any other comments from committee members? I see none. So with that, I am looking for a motion to approve the transit-oriented secondary plan prioritization. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. And with that, we can vote.
Chair, I'll vote yes on this.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And just before we proceed to the public participation meetings, I would like to draw committee members' attention to the Latch report. We did have a consent item, which was was 2.10, but we also have a public participation meeting, 3.9 on 50 King Street. Both of these appear in the Latch report. I just want to bring committee members' attention to the Latch report as we proceed through the agenda. So moving on, the next one is a public participation meeting. I'm looking for a mover to open it up on 3.1, which is 876 Wellington Road. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Lewis.
Mayor Holder, please.
If the chair is called to vote, the yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And with that, I'd like to go to committee members on this zoning change. Oh, sorry, there is no presentation. I would like to go to the public. The applicant, if the applicant is here.
They are. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Casey Kolchicki, Senior Planner with Zlin Capriam Limited. Good afternoon to yourself, committee members, members of the public and staff. I just want, just for some, without the staff presentation, just maybe, you know, being proactive and maybe addressing some of committee's questions. This application is to permit a service trade use on the subject lands, and more specifically, it's to permit a plumbing and heating establishment. A local firm, Mike Pope, Plumbing and Heating, you may have seen their white trucks while you've been sitting in traffic throughout the city. They're a local firm, multi-generational, and they're seeking a zoning change so that they can relocate their growing establishment to the subject lands. We've reviewed the staff report. We're in agreement with the recommendation that's before Planning Committee. I'm on hand to address any questions or comments from Planning Committee, as well as Adam and Carly Pope. The owners of Mike Pope Plumbing are also on hand to address any operational questions. We thank you for your time this afternoon and look forward to your decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are multi-generational, and they are seeking a.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak to this application? I see none. I'll ask one more time if there's anyone from the public that would like to speak. And with that, I would like to go to committee members to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hillier.
If the chair is calling the question, I'll vote yes.
And has Councillor Lewis?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I'd like to go to committee members for a motion or comments. Councillor Turner,
I'll move to staff recommendation.
and I have a seconder in Councillor Lewis. And Councillor Hillier, do you have a comment before we move on? Or Councillor Hillier, go ahead.
Just a welcome to say thank you for Mike Pope Plumbing to be coming to our ward. He did the work on my bakery years ago, and I know he does very fine work.
And with that, I would like to, if committee members can vote. Mayor Holder,
And I'll vote yes, Chair. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
3.2, this is a public participation meeting at 4270 Lismere Lane. I would like to go to committee members to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Turner. And
I'll
if
vote yes. Yeah, I'll vote yes. Thanks.
Councillor Hillier, closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And committee members, this is a zoning change to facilitate townhouses. There is not a presentation from staff, but I would like to go to the applicant. The applicant is here.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Scott Allen. I'm with MHBC Planning. At this time, we'd like to express our support for the findings and the recommendations of the planning staff report that was prepared by Ms. Curtis. As discussed in that report, the intent of the application is to add a site-specific R5-7 zone to 4270 Lismere Lane to permit a 66-unit cluster townhouse development within this block of the Emily Carr subdivision. I'll just briefly speak to the merits of the application. With respect to the report, we agree with the conclusions set out in that report that the proposed rezoning is consistent with applicable planning policies, compatible with surrounding development context, and will encourage greater housing choice in the community. These findings reflect our planning justification report that was submitted in support with the application as well. So to conclude, we'd like to thank city staff for their attention to this application, and with approval of this proposal, our client is looking to move forward with the site plan approval application shortly and hoping to initiate site development this spring. Thank you, and we'll gladly answer any questions committee members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I'd like to go to the public now. If there's anyone here from the public that would like to make comments to this application. I hear and see none, and I'll ask one more time if there's anyone here from the public that would like to make comments to this application. I hear and see none, so with that, I would like to go to committee members and looking to close the public participation meeting. Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Hillier. And we can proceed to vote.
Yes, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I'd like to go to committee members if there's any comments or a motion. Mayor Holder.
Yes, I'd like to move the staff report, Chair.
And it is seconded by Councillor Lewis. And I see no further comments. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of this. It's interesting as you read through it, it's kind of considered intensification, and it's on the edge of the built area and into urban reserve. right adjacent. So, but good to see mixed forms of development within a subdivision, especially something like this. It's not over intensification. It's well adjacent to single families and in that neighborhood. So I think this is an appropriate and easy to support.
Thank you for that. And I see no other comments from committee members, so we can proceed to vote.
I'll vote yes, Chair. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
With that, we're going to move on to 3.3, which is a public participation meeting for 1955 Jim Heb Way. I'm looking for a motion to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hillier. And with that, I'd like to, if we can vote.
I'll vote yes, Chair. Thank
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
For a brief, I guess, presentation on this zoning application.
The applicant has requested a zoning bylaw amendment to permit a mix of 2.5 and 3.5 story stacked back-to-back townhouse dwellings.
Mr. McShula, yes, sorry about that. You sort of faded at the beginning and then I could hear you, but I just want to make sure that all committee members can hear you. And if you don't mind, just starting all over again.
Sure.
Thank you.
The applicant has requested a zoning.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sometimes I have issues with this computer. So the applicant has requested a zoning bylaw amendment to permit a mix of 2.5 and 3.5 story stacked back-to-back townhouse dwellings and 5 building blocks fronting Jim Heb Way and Dyer Drive. Development will have pedestrian access from Jim Heb Way, Dyer Drive and Henrica Avenue, connecting to the existing pedestrian street or sidewalks and 2 vehicle access points from Dyer Drive and Jim Heb Way. The subject lands are currently vacant and are directly adjacent to low density residential to the north and east, high density residential to the south, and the Middlesex London Emergency Medical Services Station to the west. The taller 3.5 story building blocks are proposed along the Dyer Drive frontage, while the 2.5 story buildings are proposed along Jim Heb Way to provide for an appropriate transition between the higher density, high-rise forms of housing development to the south and the lower density, low-rise forms of housing development existing and planned to be to the north and east. In total, 89 residential units are proposed for the site, which yields a density of 75 units per hectare. A total of 134 parking spaces are provided, including 9 spaces for visitor parking and 6 spaces for accessible parking. Parking will be provided in the interior on the site to maintain the pedestrian oriented street corridors. The applicant has requested the special provisions to the existing R5-6 zone, which does permit the proposed stacked back-to-back townhouses. The special provisions are for the reduction of front and exterior side yards, which accommodates the building's configurations to locate parking internal to the site, away from street frontages, and to this and to site the townhouse blocks with minimal setbacks from public right-of-way, and to create a street edge, as well as establish a sense of enclosure and a comfortable pedestrian environment. The proposed front yard setback is similar to the front yard setbacks provided by the low density development to the east, as to create a continuous street edge between the 2 uses. The proposed back-to-back townhouse development would help to expand housing choices within the Fox Hollow community planning area and serve as a transition between the high density apartment buildings to the south and low density single detached homes to the north and east. The back-to-back townhouses also promotes and encourages residential intensification, which is encouraged in the 1989 official plan and the London plan. The lands are well suited for the attendant cluster house use, considering the proposed size, its location within a developing residential community, and its proximity to established retail, commercial uses, employment areas, recreational areas, and public transit routes. The increase in density is in keeping with the density and scale of the development policies of the official plan, which allows for a maximum approximate density of 75 units per hectare for lands designated multifamily medium density residential. The increased density will also allow for the development to maximize development potential on the site to contribute to the achievement of intensification targets and to provide for an appropriate transition between the existing and planned neighboring high-density and low-density residential buildings that compose the surrounding area. The existing holding provisions that were added to the zone so the subdivision application will be retained for the subject lands. In staff's opinion, the requested zoning is appropriate for the subject lands in the Foxhall Community Planning Area and should not generate any significant land use conflicts on the adjacent properties. If there are any questions from committee regarding the staff report, I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McShilla. If there's any, are there any technical questions of staff from the committee members? I see none, so I'd like to move on to the applicant, if the applicant is here.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Jay McGuffin, Principal Planner, Monteith Brown Planning Consultants. I'm here representing Foxwood Developments London, Inc., the applicant in this matter, and I'm also joined by the Vice President of Foxwood, Ms. Corey Marr. She is on the line as well. I'd like to thank Sean and staff for the recommendations in the report. We've had a chance to review the report and confer with Mr. McShilla. The amended report and bylaw that is attached, we're in support and in favor of. It is consistent with the application and the planning justification report that we've provided. Just wanted to also mention that we, subsequent to receiving comments from the community, held a privately initiated community engagement meeting on the 1st of November. We had 5 residents from the community attend, where we were able to answer questions that they had on the development proposal and provide detailed information in terms of the specificity of the land use that was being asked for, what the purpose of the amendment was in terms of the relief being requested on the yards, and what the overall design intent was. Following that, those are our submissions, Madam Chair. We are available to respond to any questions of a committee or the public.
Thank you, Mr. McGuffin, for being here. And with that, I'd like to go to the public. If there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application. I hear and see no one, so I will ask one more time if there's anyone here from the public that would like to make comments on this application. With that, I will go to committee members to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Turner. And with that,
Chair, I'll vote yes. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
and with that, I'd like to go to committee members looking for a motion and comments on this application. Councillor Turner. And if I can have a seconder. Councillor Lewis. And comments, Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just to repeat my comments on the previous file, this is a good use of space. I think it makes sense the way that the density transitions from Hyde Park and decreases in density as it gets deeper into the neighborhood. I was looking at Appendix B on public engagement, and it says the nature of liaison, and then it says responses, and it says the summary of the comments received include the following. I recognize this is kind of the general format that we see these in. I was wondering, as I read this, if there's a way that these can be formatted in the future to, they almost sound like truths the way that they're stated, right? So summary of the comments received include the following. Townhouses contribute more negatively to the neighborhood than bringing any positive changes. Rather than stating it something like a belief that townhouses contribute more negatively to the neighborhood than bringing any positive change. I don't believe that to be true, and it's an unfortunate comment. And when it sits in a city report, I know that the pains were taken to categorize them as these were community responses rather than the position of the city. I could see it getting conflated in some way. anyway, it was just a general commentary because I've seen a lot of these reports where they're framed, and sometimes the public comments are not necessarily consistent with the realities of what they bring. So I think to kind of push back a little bit on what some of the community had said here, I don't believe townhouses do contribute negatively to a neighborhood or don't bring positive change. I think they can, and I think this is a good example of a way that there's a good transition of density within the subdivision.
Thank you, Councillor Turner, for those comments. Are there any other comments? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to take an opportunity to echo Councillor Turner's concern on that. I think it's a very fair point, and I think that it does, unfortunately, and lend a little bit of extra weight to those being factual when in fact they're opinions or beliefs. And certainly I've seen these in many reports too, where I don't hold them to be true, although members of the public might. So I hope that that suggestion is taken in the spirit that Councillor Turner, I know, intended, and I certainly support, which is that we may want to just soften the language around these a little bit so that they seem less a statement of fact.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. And if the committee will allow me, I would just like to make a comment from the chair here. Really appreciate the remarks from my committee members on, I guess, community engagement in particular, and how we address it. I do want to thank the applicant, though, for holding the open house and for allowing an opportunity for the community to get more information on these applications as they come to planning. I just think that's also important and relevant with these, I guess, intensification projects that the community is not so much, there's concern, but the more information that is shared, the more the community is aware of our policies and being able to, I guess, articulate concerns in a different manner. I'm very supportive of that as well. So with that, we've got a motion on the floor. And if we can go and vote on the Mayor Holder.
Yes, thank you. I'll vote yes, Chair. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving on to 3.4, which is another public participation meeting on 506 Oxford Street East. And this is another zoning change. I'm looking for a committee to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Turner. And if we can vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
This is we're adding a new policy here. No changes to the building. So presentation, I would like to go to the applicant. The applicant is here. Would like to make some comments.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. It's Matt Campbell from Zelenka Priamo here. I don't have anything to add to the staff report that has already been prepared. We're certainly in support of the staff recommendation for approval. For the committee's consideration, what we're looking at here is a zoning bylaw amendment to permit a pharmacy in an existing building that has been converted from a previous residential use to partly a commercial use. There's still a unit on the upper floor. This is in an area of Oxford Street that has seen quite a bit of office conversions, medical dental office conversions, uses of that nature, and is generally in keeping with those uses. Madam Chair, as you mentioned, there's no physical change to the building that's proposed at this time, and we understand this is not subject to site plan approval. Again, the intent here is to permit a pharmacy on the main floor of the dwelling. And that pharmacy is more or less a spin-off use of some of the other medical dental offices that are in the immediate area. If there's any questions, I'm happy to respond to them as necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And I see Councillor Turner has a question. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick technical question for Mr. Campbell. In the public engagement, one of the property neighbors had some concerns about shared driveway and parking and some previous damage from the previous patrons of that. Have there been any discussions with the adjacent property owners to try and reconcile some of those concerns?
Through the chair to Councillor Turner, thanks for the question. Great question. I can advise that that my client has engaged the services of a surveyor to actually determine where the lot line is, and they're currently working out exactly the issue of the shared driveway. So that is an issue that we're actively on top of and trying to find an amicable way to deal with that issue. And thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go now to the public. If there's anyone that would like to make a comment on this application.
Serge Babenko.
Hi there. Yes, thank you for allowing me to pose a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Babenko, please proceed. You have up to 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question. I'm a neighbor close by, so I received the document. I live on St. James Street. My question is this pharmacy a pharmacy that's typically open to the public, or is this more of the type of pharmacy, private pharmacy dedicated to the clients of the doctor's office?
We can follow up after the public participation meeting, Mr. Babenko, and get your an answer to your question. Is there anything else that you would like to ask or comment?
I just, for me and some other neighbors, we're just wondering, is this in fact a change of use to provide it to be a clinic, more of a a medical clinic for those who are, for some of like those other clinics in London that have popped up to deal with that need?
We'll get an answer to your question. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
No.
No?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak to this application?
I don't see him on the Zoom. Jason Parker, are you available?
Madam Chair, I can confirm that that person has not come in through Zoom.
Okay. And with that, I'll ask if there's anyone else from the public that would like to make a comment. I hear and see none, so I will go to committee members to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Turner. And with that, we can vote.
I will.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Before I go to committee members, I will ask maybe if the applicant is here to respond to the question from the public member about the pharmacy. Is it a pharmacy or a clinic?
Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Yes,
it's Matt Madam Chair, it's Matt Campbell here again. I can't definitively answer that question because that hasn't been explicitly stated to me. But what I can say is that this pharmacy is intended to be a resource for the medical offices that are in the immediate area. So it's likely that if there was a prescription that would be handed out at one of these medical offices, then an individual or patient will be able to go to this pharmacy to get that prescription filled, whatever that may be. It was not explicitly stated that this was intended for to be open to the public, although I can't confirm that at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell, for the answer. Hopefully that satisfies the public. And I'm looking for a motion from committee members for this zoning change to allow for a pharmacy. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Turner. Any comments from committee members? Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to staff. Would it make a difference in your recommendation based on the fact that this could be used, either way, as a private dispensary or a public dispensary?
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomazinski here, if I may answer that. When I check the zoning bylaw, I just want to be clear that the zoning right now permits medical dental offices. The zoning does not permit clinics, nor does our recommendation, that won't permit clinics either. I sometimes members of the public want to be delicate and don't want to ask the question, so I'll just put it out there in case this is what the member of the public was asking. The question might have been, is this going to be a methadone clinic? And the answer, if that is the question, the answer to that is no. That also requires it to be a very specific use. It must be a methadone clinic, and there is no application and no recommendation to zone this as a methadone clinic. I hope that answers the questions.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, that helps me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'd like to thank Mr. Tomazinski for that response, because that certainly would be a question that weighs in the community's minds. And if that hadn't been directly asked, I would have put that forward. But thank you for clarifying.
And with that, I'm looking for a motion for this zoning change. Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Hillier. And if we can proceed to vote.
I'll say yes, Chair. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Along quite smoothly here to 3.5, which is a public participation meeting for 1408 Ernest Avenue. I'm looking at committee members to open up the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Lehman, seconded by Mayor Holder. And we can vote.
Thank you, Chair.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And with that, there is not a staff presentation on this application. It is a conversion from commercial to residential. I would like to go to the applicant if the applicant is here.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Jay McGuffin again, Monteith Brown Planning Consultants. I'm here on behalf of our client, Wagdi Botros, who is also in attendance this evening with his architect. It's a fairly simple application. It's an existing commercial building in at this point in the 1989 official plan, in a medium medium density residential designation. The proposal is its conversion to residential zoning to allow for the development of 19 or 18 residential units on the interior, 9 on each floor, and the provision of 64 parking spaces in the existing parking lot to the rear of the building. Through our planning submission, our client's architect presented renderings of the redeveloped proposal, taking the 2-story building and converting it using a glass facade for the improvements to the building, providing pedestrian connections to the surrounding street sidewalk, and maintaining the existing built form. The London plan also designates the subject lands for residential development through the neighborhoods place type. And the requested zoning is looking for basically the acknowledgement of the existing setbacks in place, 4 meters. Sorry, I'm just skipping to exactly what we're looking for. 4 meters for the front yard and 4 meters to the interior side yard to represent the existing building on the property. And to rezone the land, it would be into an R8-4 special zone. That is, we are in support of the staff recommendation for approval of the application. We've had an opportunity to review the proposed draft zoning bylaw and concur with the recommendations as they are consistent with our application and planning justification report. And I will be available to answer any questions of committee or the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGuffin. Any technical questions from committee members? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple quick ones. It looks like this is basically using the existing form. Is there a requirement for site plan on this, or does it go, are we just doing the rezoning and that's also required because it's using the same footprint?
If I can go to staff on that, if we need a site plan for this?
Through you, Madam Chair, no site plan approval is required for this.
Councillor Turner.
Okay, thanks. So that leads to the second question. Is just there were two comments from urban design. One was with respect to private amenity space. It looks like that's might be difficult to accomplish. I'm not sure if Mr. McGuffin has an opportunity to comment on that. The second one was a pedestrian connection from the rear to the sidewalk to allow for those connectivities instead of just to the parking lot. Are those things that can be accommodated or contemplated?
Mr. McGuffin?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Member Turner. Absolutely. I would be speaking out of turn. However, I think I would have to ask our client's architect to speak in regard to the design-related matters. Certainly from a physical perspective, the installation of a sidewalk is not an issue. There are sidewalks that have been proposed as part of the development submission that extend to the entryways of the various units that will be ground-oriented.
That's for you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McGuffin. I think the other question probably answers itself, but just looking at the proposed form, there's probably no opportunities for balconies or anything like that as recommended in the urban design comments. Is there any opportunity for any amenity space for the residents of this building?
Through you, Madam Chair, there is quite a lot of amenity space. Pre-consultation meeting notes may have been on a different variation of this particular application. So the plan that was put forward does provide a significant amount of amenity space, both fore and aft of the existing building, and then a larger open green space at the back of the building as well. So there is a fair amount of green space provided on the site.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And I'll go to Councillor Hillier. We are right now on technical questions of the applicant.
Yes, thank you. Just to continue the line that Councillor Turner was running with, looking at this and it's showing 64 parking spaces, and I understand when it was a commercial building, it did require that many. Has any thought been given into increasing the green space amenity at this location? Because I don't think, like I'm looking at 18 units, that's 64 spaces, or 64 spaces. That's a lot of spaces for 18 units.
Mr. McGuffin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Councillor Hillier, there is a subsequent development proposal being considered going forward for the intensification of the rear portion of the property. That was my comment back to Mr. Turner, and in the pre-consultation, some of the comments provided addressed a more densely developed site plan than the one that was actually landed on and coming forward. There will be an opportunity for intensification on the remainder of the property. At this point in time, there has been no consideration in terms of reducing the number of parking spaces. Should the proponent decide not to proceed with an intensification at the rear of the property in the future, then I would anticipate that there would be such a requirement, or an ability, pardon me, in terms of reducing the amount of parking.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes, thank you. Just a follow-up. So in case of intensification in the rear of this property, how many parking spaces have been allocated for this unit?
I believe your requirement is a 1.5 spaces per unit. So 16 units times 1.5. Okay. 24 units, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no other questions from committee members, technical only. I'd like to go to the public. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to make comments on this application? I see none. I'll ask one more time. If there's anyone here that would like to speak, please come forward.
25. Oops.
I see none. I will go to committee members to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Lewis. If we can proceed to vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Committee members for to bring forward a motion and comments or both. Councillor Turner. Moved by Councillor Turner. And I'm looking for a seconder, Councillor Lewis. Comments from committee members. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is actually pretty exciting. It's a really interesting adaptive reuse of a commercial building, and I think it looks pretty promising and pretty smart. So happy to support this.
And I see no other comments from committee members. If I may, I'd like to make a comment here from the chair. I look at this as good news too, going from commercial to residential. You don't see that too often in zoning applications here at committee. So really pleased to support this as well, and glad to see this. Hope to see more. And with that, if we can proceed to vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And moving forward to 3.6, which is a public participation meeting on 978 Gainsborough Road. I think we are on time to hear this public participation meeting. So I am looking to committee members to open it up. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Hillier.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Committee members, I know there has been a request for a referral here, but I would like to proceed with the public participation meeting that we have on hand. We do have maybe a staff presentation, if I can go to staff to proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Elena Riley here, Development Services. As mentioned, there is a request for a deferral. So I'm just going to provide a short presentation, just providing some context. The presentation is in the added agenda before you. The application 978 Gainsborough Road. It's on the southeast of Hyde Park and Gainsborough. It's set back in from the corner within the Hyde Park Hamlet area. It's an undeveloped site and is surrounded by apartment building to the south, undeveloped lands and residential uses to the east, commercial uses to the north, and a single detached and commercial uses to the west. A quick policy overview. The subject site is located in the neighborhood place type, which permits a variety of residential uses, including townhouses, stacked townhouses, apartments. Maximum height in the London plan is 4 stories or 6 stories with bonusing. The site is in the multifamily high density residential in the 1989 official plan, which contemplates residential intensification up to a max density of 150 units per hectare. The subject site is also in the Hyde Park community plan, which did cluster the multifamily high density residential designations around the proposed business district at that time, to encourage higher densities within walking distance. So these lands are within that residential cluster. And I just want to make note that the current zoning is a residential R9 with some holding provisions on it for public site plan and some servicing. It currently allows for 15-story apartment buildings with a density of 150. The applicant is proposing 2 20-story apartment buildings interconnected by 4-story podium. with a total of 373 residential units at a density of 287 units per hectare and 477 parking spots. Special provisions are also being sought for a minimum front yard setback of 6.2 meters, west interior side yard setback of 12 meters, a rear yard setback of 21, and a maximum lot coverage of 31, along with just providing 25% for landscaped open space. And they're also seeking a maximum building height of 70 meters, which would be the 20 stories. They've also requested to add a bonus zone to permit the density, and they're proposing to offer the following facility services and matters in return for this height and density, which include affordable housing, exceptional site and building design, underground parking, employment, related daycare, and a direct cash contribution for improvements to the Hyde Park Village Green. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Any technical questions from committee members? Councillor Turner.
Just a quick one. I think Mr. Riley might have mentioned it at the beginning, but Mr. Frusios submitted a letter asking for a deferral and indicated that staff was supportive of that. Could I just get confirmation of that?
For you, Madam Chair, staff is supportive of the deferral.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see no other technical questions. I will move on to the applicant.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's Harry Frusios, Senior Associate with Zelenka Preamble before you this evening on behalf of Highland Communities. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of my client this afternoon. I'll be brief. I just wanted to start off by thanking staff for their efforts. Unfortunately, we don't always agree with staff with the recommendations. The recommendation report before you is proof of that. But we certainly recognize and appreciate their efforts in processing these applications, especially under the challenging times that we're still faced with over the last couple of years. The request for referral before you this evening is to allow more discussion with staff regarding a revised development proposal for the subject lands that includes some element of bonusing in exchange for community benefits such as affordable housing. As was mentioned, the site is currently designated in the 1989 official plan and is zoned to permit a high-rise apartment building up to 50 meters, approximately 15 stories high, and a density of up to 150 units per hectare. Based on the city's desire for the creation of more affordable housing units in our community, our client saw this as an opportunity to increase the height and density permissions for these lands in exchange for affordable housing units, as well as public daycare space and contributions for local park improvements. As we're all aware, the principal mechanism currently in place to secure affordable housing from the private development community is through bonusing of additional height and or density beyond what the current OP official plan policies and zoning allow for. And while our client currently remains willing to provide these community benefits as part of the ultimate development scheme for these lands, it should be noted that there is no requirement to provide any of these benefits under the current zoning permissions. We acknowledge and appreciate staff's efforts on this application. It was pointed out to us early in the process that the proposed height may not be supported. And through subsequent back and forth discussions, there was no indication that any level of intensification or bonusing could be supported. And it would ultimately be left up to council to either support it or refer it back to staff for more discussion. However, based on recent events and outcomes with a similar application that was brought forward by our firm, we are hesitant to proceed with the PEC recommendation on that basis and feel that more discussions are warranted to give prior to PEC providing a recommendation on this application. And notwithstanding staff's recommendation to refuse the current design, we believe that there is merit in having more discussions with staff to come up with a revised design that will allow our client to achieve some additional intensification that is in keeping with existing high-rise built form in the area and still able to provide the city with the community benefits that have been mentioned. I want to thank staff for taking the time over the past week to discuss this matter with us more thoroughly and agreeing to work with us towards providing an appropriate development scheme and avoid what I believe is a missed opportunity that would benefit both the city and our client. We are confident that a mutually agreed upon development proposal can be reached, and we look forward to Planning Committee's referral of the application back to staff. Again, Madam Chair, thank you for the time to present on behalf of our client, and I'm able to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to move on to Councillor Turner. Technical questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps for you to Mr. Frusios. It's my understanding that affordable housing could be incorporated into any building design, and an applicant could work with the Housing Development Corporation to incorporate that. Why does that need to be in the context of bonusing?
Through you, Madam Chair, that it's one of the mechanisms that is available to us right now to encourage affordable housing. I mean, this development could have affordable housing regardless of the bonusing approach, but it was something that we have brought forward on behalf of this client and other clients as sort of an opportunity to be able to get more intensity on a property in exchange for the affordable housing units.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other questions from the committee. I would like to go to the public. If there's anyone here from the public that would like to make comments on this application. I'd like to go to committee 1 and 2. Please come forward, keeping your mask on, and just if you can give us your name and address if you wish. And you have up to 5 minutes. Please proceed.
A resident of 1030 Coronation Drive. I don't represent the board necessarily, or anybody on the board or others in the building, but my unit looks directly over the proposed development. And I look over that property, and to me, everything that they say they want out of here in reduced spaces and stuff like that, like I look at their planned developments and I say, they're trying to shoehorn a size 9 foot into a size 6 shoe. Basically, there's no room for this place. And when they built that commercial development just off Gainsborough to the north, I remember they hauled in a real large amount of granular fill before they built the building. And they pushed basically all the water to the south. And the property parcel that we're talking about is basically a swamp right now. So I can imagine only that they'd have to haul in a bunch of more fill in that to build this structure, huge, super high structure. So the drainage, like, is this water going to get pushed back onto our property now? What kind of access are they looking at to get to this place off of Coronation or wherever, off of Gainsborough? I don't know how they get to it, but in any event, all of the setback concessions that the city might be considering, to me, I just can't see it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We did not get your name. If you could just come forward to the microphone again and state your name, please.
Paul Rachar, Rachar.
Thank you, Mr. Rachar. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to make a comment on this application? And I'll ask one more time. If there's anyone else from the public that would like to make comments, please come forward. I see none, so I will go to the committee to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Hillier. And with that, we can go to vote.
I'll vote yes, Chair. Thank you.
Comment? Oh, no. All right. Fair enough.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Morgan, the ward councillor, is here. Just before I go to the ward councillor and to committee members, I would like to follow up with, I guess, two concerns from the public. One around the drainage issue and the access, how the access is any concerns around that? If I can go to whoever would like to speak to that.
Madam Chair, I can speak to that on behalf of our client.
Thank you.
We acknowledge we do acknowledge that there are constraints relating to the servicing and to the access, but that is all going to be completed through the planned extension of a public laneway across the frontage of the property. And that will be done in due course. The holding provision will deal with that. We have provided a traffic report, our engineering studies that do demonstrate these lands can be serviced and that access is appropriate for the proposed density that was provided as part of the application. But we expect that those matters can easily be dealt with through subsequent discussions with staff at the appropriate time when the service laneway has been constructed. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know there was a concern addressed from the public around the drainage issue, maybe going to staff if they've looked at that. And any comments from staff?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's Mike Corby here. The issues with drainage and stormwater flows over the property would be dealt with at the site plan approval process. And they would have to identify that they can contain the stormwater on site and not impact the abutting properties.
Thank you. And if the committee will allow me, I will go to Deputy Mayor Morgan to make comments. Welcome to planning.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make some just general comments on the current staff report, although I know that there's a request for a referral. I think that the staff report is appropriate here for this property. The refusal of this particular application for a number of the reasons mentioned makes a lot of sense. The applicant is right, and something for the community to note that without our approval and under a certain density, a building of 15 stories could be built today. And for that reason, I think staff have made a good call. The London plan in this area is actually headed in the opposite direction, but I recognize what is allowed on the site. If the idea of a referral comes up, I would be supportive of that. And in this case, what you've heard is our staff are supportive of a referral, the applicant's supportive of a referral. And I think that there is an opportunity for them to discuss whether or not there's some element of bonusing that could be incorporated into a design that might have a little more density, but perhaps not more height, although obviously that's subject to our staff's recommendations. Building a 15-story building without any sort of public good attached to it, I think would be an unfortunate circumstance if it wasn't pursued. Obviously, this would be the subject of the discussions with our staff to see if there was something that could be appropriately accommodated under all of the processes that they would usually follow. And so to give that time, I think would be an appropriate step. It also gives the public some time to consider this application and what is currently allowed on the site and what they might like to see. I know in the current bonusing suggestions, there were a number of things mentioned of which would provide some community benefit, including the affordability of the housing, the building design, and also funding for an unfunded park in the area. There's a park that's been allocated and there is no budget for that park. And so I thought that was a creative approach to some of the bonusing. So there's clearly the opportunity for a discussion here. And I think if the committee would be supportive, a referral of this to our staff to see if there's a development here that would suit and move towards their ability to recommend it, then I think that giving them that time is probably appropriate.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. Committee members, Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for those comments. This area is it's an up and comer. And I think we have to be very cautious on what goes on here for long-term impact. Through you, Chair, to staff, what is the height of the development right at the northwest corner of Hyde Park and Gainsborough?
I can go to staff on the height from the northwest corner.
Through you, Madam Chair, Mike Corby here. If you just want to give us a minute, I believe it was approved at 12 stories, but I'd like to confirm that.
Thank you. Yeah, while he confirms that, was kind of my general idea. And so I was a little set back to when I saw not only one, but two 20-story towers being proposed here, something that I would expect to see downtown. It's definitely not in keeping with the Hyde Park area here, the village aspect, you know, at the corner. There's a 12 or 15-story building, and with commercial on the bottom, that I think will really add to the activity in that area. When I first read this, I was tempted to actually vote against referring it because I think it's so far off what I envisioned there. However, staff are wiser than I, and I'm sure they have the same concerns. And given Deputy Mayor Morgan, it's in his ward, I'm sure he has similar concerns. If he believes a referral is the best way to go here, then I will support that.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yes,
sorry,
Mr.
Mike
Corby.
Corby here. I have an answer for the councillor. They're approved for 29 meters, roughly 8 stories in height.
Councillor Lehman?
I mean, and that's, you know, that even adds more weight to my concerns. That's in keeping with the look of this area, and this proposed development is very close to that corner and to other businesses, you know, in Gainsborough that I would consider kind of that marketplace, so to speak. I'll be talking to staff about this, so you know their vision, and Councillor or Deputy Mayor Morgan, you know what is the city's vision for this you know new coming, you know, like a Wortley Village type place, but in the northwest end of London. So, but as I said, I'll support the referral here for the reasons mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Lehman. I'd like to go to Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. If Councillor Lehman is moving the referral, I'm prepared to second it, Chair, or vice versa, as he prefers. What we have is kind of a unique situation where we have where we have staff, where we have the applicant, and we have the ward councillor all supporting this referral back, somewhat different than a more recent circumstance where a referral back was not successful. But I look forward to the applicant working with staff and hear that result. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor, moved by Councillor Lehman, seconded by the Mayor. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad Deputy Mayor Morgan had an opportunity to speak. It's helpful. The referral sounds appropriate on its face. Without this, I would be very tempted to refuse. We've heard from a number of councillors so far that the height is a fairly significant departure from what's permitted here. The 4 to 6 stories that would normally be allowed under the place type is exceeded by an historic zoning, which allows up to 15 stories. So that's a huge jump on its own right. And then the applicant's coming forward looking for 33% more, which is a significant ask and a little gutsy, I guess, which is why I reading through this, I would have been inclined to just to move for the refusal outright. If there's an opportunity for a reconciliation of positions between the city and the applicant, that would be really helpful. I think as we've heard from a few councillors so far, there is concern with the height. So I hope that what is brought back isn't another 20-story building or an 18-story building, that it is limited to 15 stories. And that's what we're hearing from my colleagues. I know that might not be universal, but that's been in the statements of a few people to speak so far. So that's an important piece. I think it's really also important for us to understand why large, high density might be inappropriate here. We, in general, as a council, support the idea of trying to get as much housing as we can. And I think that's a really good overall goal. The challenge is that there's not the infrastructure to support high density in this circumstance. There's not transit infrastructure. There's not necessarily shopping infrastructure. There's not the ability for that infrastructure to be there. But it is in other places. And so the reason why we try to consolidate high density and the high heights to the transit corridor, to the downtown, and to the transit villages is because that's where we need that density to consolidate. Whenever we kind of freelance these things outside of that, then that erodes our ability to be able to consolidate the density along those corridors. In the same way that we need to be able to consolidate our commercial space in the core and not have large commercial towers out on the periphery of the city, because every time we do that, it undermines the viability of the downtown. So I'm intrigued to see what comes back from the referral. I hope that it's a productive discussion, and I hope that the applicant has had the opportunity to hear the comments of my colleagues on the committee and the deputy mayor as well.
If there are any other comments, I see none. If the committee will allow me just to make a brief comment as well. This was something I was very supportive of the staff's recommendation to refuse this, and I really appreciated the conversation that we've had here, and Deputy Mayor Morgan being here with his comments. There is a great difference to what is allowed and what we have in front of us. So I will be supporting the referral back, but it is something that this type of intensity at the outer edges of our city should not be there. They should be in our downtown core. I really feel very strongly that we have our policies in place to support that. And if there's opportunities for further discussions, and in particular, if the applicant is listening to this planning committee, it's really important to take note of how what we should be doing, and it all is around that height. It is a great departure from what is allowed. So with that, I'll be supporting the referral back, and I will go to Deputy Morgan for another comment.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to add one piece of context, because I know members of the community are listening in and will follow this. And I just want to let them know why we would entertain a referral rather than just outright refusal. With an outright refusal, they can go, as of the right within the zoning, to go and build a 15-story building within a certain amount of density there now. And given the direction that the London plan is going, I think that there is a likelihood that they would do that, given the discussions that I've had. Having an opportunity for one further discussion to see if there is a possibility of a slight increase in density. And I agree with Councillor Turner, I would not go height, but density here, to see if there is an appropriate trade-off for some public goods, whether that's design of the building or housing or other trade-offs. That is worth a discussion, but it may be that discussion with our staff leads to, no, you just build within what is of your right, and there aren't appropriate trade-offs. But it seems like staff is willing to do this. The applicant is willing to do it, and from a perspective of municipal council, I can tell you it would be better for the community, rather than just a 15-story building as is and as of right, to get some sort of trade-off for some reasonable increase in density, but not height here. I think that that's worth a conversation. Whether or not it works out, I'm not certainly committing myself to voting either way on this when it comes back to council, but I'm willing to entertain the discussion. And I want my constituents to know that that is what we are doing today, and that they should be very aware of what this particular developer can go and build tomorrow with just a refusal, and that's 15-story buildings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. And with that, we do have a motion moved by Councillor Lehman and seconded by Mayor Holder. And if we can proceed to vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll vote yes.
And this is on, hold on the, it being referred back.
That's correct, Chair. Thank you. My vote stands.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay. And we're moving right along to the next public participation meeting. And this is on 414, 418 Old Wonderland Road. This is a site plan public participation meeting with comments to the site plan process. If I can have a member from the committee to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, and it is seconded by Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I will look to staff for a brief presentation. I know when this came to us originally, it was a bit contentious, and I think it warrant a brief presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Melanie Vivian, Site Development Planner. I will be referencing the presentations starting on page 39 of the added agenda in front of you. As noted, the proposed development is located at 414, 418 Old Wonderland Road, which is just south of Springbank Drive and north of Teeple Terrace. So the proposed development in front of us consists of 13 townhouse units and 8 stacked townhouse units for a total of 29 units on site. The development also contains an open space area located in the northeast corner of the subject lands. And this was as a result of the submitted environmental impact assessment that was reviewed through the zoning bylaw amendment application as well. So the elevations that are shown on page 341, slide 2, it shows both the townhouse and stacked townhouse elevations. Given the grading on the site, the height of the units does vary from roughly 7.5 meters to a maximum of 10.8 meters. And it's worth noting that the maximum height permitted under the zone is 12 meters. So as previously mentioned, the site was rezoned earlier this year to permit the proposed cluster townhouse development at a density of 50 units per hectare, which is below the maximum permitted density of the zoning bylaw. The site does propose a total of 53 parking spaces, being 2 parking spaces per unit for the townhouse blocks, 1 in the garage, 1 in the driveway. A special provision was approved to the rezoning application to allow 1 parking space for the stacked townhouses. They've also provided 3 visitor parking spaces on site and a lot coverage of 33.4, which is well below the maximum permitted of 45%, and a landscape open space of 38.3. So the resolution of council from the rezoning included direction to the site plan approval authority for board-on-board fencing along the east, north, and south property boundaries that exceeded the standards of the site plan control bylaw, ensuring the naturalization with the feature restoration and compensation, keeping with the recommendations of the environmental impact assessment, ensuring the development ensuring that the development agreement is clear regarding the protection of that compensation area, and then ensuring the creation of the small berm along the edges of the snow storage, just to ensure that the flows are directed back towards the road surface and not towards the pond feature to the north. So through the circulation process of the public site plan meeting and the application, we received 2 comments. One of the responses was just requesting further information on the meeting, and the other was regarding the proposed fencing. So even through the rezoning application, loss of privacy was a prominent matter. So to address council's resolution and the privacy concerns, the applicant is proposing a 2.1 meter board-on-board fence along the perimeter of most of the site, along that northern property boundary, to mitigate any impacts on that natural heritage feature. Just to the east of Unit 18 and within that open space zone, a 1.2 meter chain link fence is proposed. Around the entirety of the rest of the site, it will be 2.1 meter board-on-board fencing. With that, staff are of the opinion that the proposed plans satisfy council's resolution. I'm happy to go into more detail and answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vivian. Any technical questions? I see none. I will go to the applicant if the applicant is here.
Hello, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. McClure.
Hi. Yes, Solomon McClure with 414A. I don't have a whole lot to add to Melanie Vivian's presentation there. I think she addressed all the major concerns appropriately, and I'm just happy to be on standby here to answer any questions that yourself or members of the committee or public might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. Any technical questions? I see none. I will go to the public. If there's anyone here from the public that would like to make comments. I hear and see none. I'll ask one more time. If there's anyone that would like to make comments to this application. I see none. With that, I'll go to committee members. Councillor Turner to close the PPM. Oh,
Madam Chair, if I may, I see somebody identified for 3.7, Harry Grossens. Is he with the applicant or is he one of the community members?
Yeah, I'm with the applicant.
Okay, great, thanks. Just wanted to be sure.
thank you. So with that, I would like to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Lehman. And with that, we can vote.
Chair, I'll vote yes, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And with that, I'd like to go to the committee members for comments. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I am thankful to the previous committee for asking these things to be incorporated in site plan. I'm the councillor for the area. This stretch of Old Wonderland has seen a fair amount of development and challenges over the past, especially with the Teeple Terrace development and its very extensive history. So when this came forward within the neighborhood, this was something that was met with some apprehension. In fact, actually, I remember speaking with people back in 2014 when I was knocking on doors about this. So I am glad that the community had an opportunity to speak at the last. I'm glad there was the opportunity for a public site plan meeting for today. It sounds like, by the sounds of it, most of the community concerns have been addressed by virtue of not seeing anybody here today, which is perhaps helpful, and the comments in the file too. I think, as mentioned, the mitigation measures here are reasonable. My concern goes back to the beginning, back when the zoning was approved. It is within the zone, but the zone is the maximum within that zoning class, and the zoning bylaw doesn't really contemplate the maximum class within this zone to be applied on peripheral developments. It's meant for core developments. But notwithstanding that, I think this can be a successful application. It preserves some of the natural features. It contemplates some of those privacy concerns, and hopefully it ends up being a good infill development and is harmonious with the neighborhood as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. And with that, I am looking for other comments from committee members and a motion to receive the information. Mayor Holder is moving the motion.
Happy. Yes, I'll make that motion. Thank you, Chair.
And I'm looking for a seconder. I guess Councillor Hillier, thank you. And if the committee will just allow me to make some brief comments, I completely agree with the ward councillor on the challenges that the community has had in this area with infill development and the changes that are going on in their neighborhood. And I really appreciate the process that we're allowing the community to take into consideration their concerns, especially around the privacy, the board-on-board fencing, and the natural heritage area too. That's why we're going with the chain link fence as well, to accommodate that natural feature of this area and the sensitivity of this development. I want to thank the applicant for the working with staff as well. So with that, I will look for a motion, or if we can proceed to vote.
Chair, I'll vote yes, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
With that, moving on to 3.8, which is a public participation meeting not to be heard before 6, we're at 5:45. I wonder if committee members would like to have a break. And if we can, so we have about 15 minutes, if we want to go 20 minutes.
Chair, Chair?
Yes.
I wonder if there's some other issues. I acknowledge the PPM, but I wonder if there's anything with respect to either items for direction or deferred matters that we might be able to deal with just to move this along, but I'm at the pleasure of the chair.
Well, we can proceed both ways. I'm looking at committee members on how they would like to proceed. We do have items for direction, 4.1 and 4.2, which is receiving reports from the Advisory Committee on the Environment and Trees and Forests. And then we do have a request for a delegation from Mr. Kirkness. I'm not sure if he is here at the moment. He is not. So I also know we have had an added report from Latch 2 that we will be receiving. So committee members, I'm at your pleasure here, how you would like to proceed. Are we willing to go for a break? Councillor Lewis, and then I'll go to the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure that the deferred matters or the items for direction, especially as Mr. Kirkness isn't here yet, are something that's the reports from the advisory committees, I think, could be dispensed with pretty quickly. But without Mr. Kirkness here, I think it's just appropriate that we take a 15-minute recess and resume at 6 p.m. as scheduled.
Okay, I see some nods. Mayor Holder.
Chair, respectfully, no, I don't agree, because it's nice to get business done that's cleaner, easier without the other public things that stand there. If the committee votes to take a break, I mean, typically we don't do that even in our own council meetings until 6:30, and it's a bit of ways away. But I'm at your pleasure. If the I would just soon move on with the issues we can move on with, and and because all these things take the time they take. But whatever the group wants, Chair, then. But I would prefer that we carry through. But at your pleasure, you're the chair.
Thank you, Mayor Holder, for those comments. And I guess we can slowly talk our way to 6 o'clock here. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of the mayor's initiative on this. I think we can do 4.1, 4.2, 5.1, and possibly 5.2. We don't have to do 4.3 at this point, and we can take care of those rather quickly.
Okay, so if we're okay with that, we will proceed. So we'll go to items for direction. We will not deal with 4.3, which is a delegation request. We'll go to 4.1 and 4.2. So committee, just looking to see if any comments and receiving these reports. Councillor Turner.
I'll move the request. I think it was with respect to 5.2 that the advisory committee's comments be forwarded to municipal council through PEC.
Which report is that? Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm.
And the advisory committee on the environment's report.
Okay.
Is that where we are? I believe that's where we are.
Yes, that's right. Okay. And looking for a seconder and Councillor Lehman. And if we can proceed to vote.
I'll vote yes, Chair. Thank you. And thank my colleagues for carrying on.
Keeping calm too, Mr. Mayor.
So I note. You're very good tonight. Sorry.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving on to report of the Trees and Forest Advisory Committee, looking to receive the report. Mayor Holder.
Happy to receive that report, Chair. Thank you.
Looking for a seconder. Councillor Lehman? I see no comments. We can proceed to vote.
Chair, I'll vote yes, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Chair, is there any, sorry, Chair, excuse me, is there any chance that Mr. Kirkness is here?
I have checked. He is not.
Thank you.
I'd like to proceed to 5.1, the deferred matters list. I would prefer just waiting on that one, committee members, if we want to approve the list right now, but we can wait until the end of the meeting on that. 5.2 is the latch report. And as noted at the beginning of the meeting, there are 2 items that are on the latch report. The first one was on the consent item 2.10 on Albion Street, which is 4.2. And the second one, which is still to be heard, is 3.9 50 King Street, which is 4.1. So looking to committee to approve the report. Mayor Holder, Councillor Turner.
Chair, thank you.
Just a quick clarification on 4.1. If we received this at this point, have we dealt with the actual agenda item in our agenda by doing so, or do we have to hold this for a second in order to proceed? Looks like Ms. Westlake Power might have an answer to that.
Ms. Westlake Power?
Yes, through the chair. Council is the decision-making body, so it's certainly within your prerogative to accept the recommendations of the Latch Committee, but that does not bind the council decision. That will be based on the staff report that's also on your agenda.
So we can proceed, committee members, if you would like to make comments on the Latch report, Mayor Holder.
Again, just to confirm, I'm happy to receive that report, Chair.
Looking for a seconder in Councillor Lehman.
Chair, I'll vote yes, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
We do have 2 items from direction still to vote on the deferred matters list and the delegation request. And with that, Councillor Turner.
I'll move recess.
And if we can have a time to get back at 6 o'clock. So that's almost 10 minutes, committee members. Looking for a seconder. Councillor Lewis, do we need a hand vote? We can do a hand vote. We'll see you in 9. Thank you. Welcome back, members, to the Planning Environmental Committee. We are proceeding to our next public participation meeting, which is 3.8, and this is on the adoption and the adoption of the environmental management guidelines. I'm looking to the committee to open up the public participation meeting. Hoping committee members are here. Councillor Lehman is opening it up, and it's seconded by Councillor Hillier.
Chair, I'll vote yes.
And with that, I'm just looking to see if all committee members are here.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I would like to go to staff for a presentation.
Good evening, Chair Hopkins, members of PEC, staff, and members of the public. Through you, Chair Hopkins, this is Emily Williamson, ecologist planner in planning and development for item 3.8, found on page 345 of the agenda package. This will be a brief oral presentation providing background of what the environmental management guidelines are, the consultation process to update this document, as well as key recommendations. This is a request to adopt the environmental management guidelines. The environmental management guidelines are a city guideline document that provide additional technical detail for the implementation of London Plan policies, setting out in more detail the requirements of environmental studies for development and site alteration. The previous environmental management guidelines were approved by Council as a complete document in 2007. Since then, updates to municipal, provincial, and federal policy and guidance, as well as updates to scientific understanding, have resulted in a guideline that is out of date. In 2019, the update process was initiated. The revised EMGs recommended for adoption are found on pages 351 to 496 of the agenda package. The previous engagement during pre-consultation, phase 1 and phase 2 project stages included 20 meetings with external resource groups and First Nations communities. A second draft was circulated to various groups in the October 18th, 2021 Planning and Environment Committee meeting, incorporating the April 18th, 2021 London Plan Appeals Policy Resolution. Given the extent of the revisions and the length of the document, staff extended a 1-month review period to external groups and provided an opportunity for additional meetings per group and where possible to discuss and where possible resolve any outstanding questions or concerns. This resulted in 3 additional meetings with 6 external resource groups. Comments received associated with those meetings and the October 18th draft are found on pages 497 to 536. Staff have updated and clarified the guidelines based on this input. Our redline version of the changes made from the October 18 draft to the recommended guidelines is available on pages 537 to 688. A summary list of these changes is noted in section 2.0 of the report under changes resulting from meetings. Special consideration was given to distinguish between the full and scoped EIS, language refinement associated with the buffer table, the distinction between woodlands and significant woodlands, and greater clarity with respect to permitted uses within buffers, including additional text to support pathways and LIDs. The proposed guidelines are consistent with the provincial policy statement, the Natural Heritage Reference Manual, and the London Plan. Changes to the 2020 Environmental Management Guidelines draft focused on reducing redundancy, improving clarity, aligning the guidelines with the approved London Plan policy, and incorporating comments where appropriate. Thank you. This concludes my brief presentation. Staff are available to answer any questions you may have. And in addition, we have our external consultants, Dr. Gary Epp of ACOM and Margot Yursik of Grounded Solutions Services Limited. They're with us tonight and are able to speak to some of the research and development of these guidelines and how the guidelines compare with other municipalities.
Thank you, Ms. Williamson. I'd like to go to committee members if they've got any technical questions of staff. I see none. I'd like to now go to the public.
Sandy Levin, Chair, Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee.
Mr. Levin, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, I want to start by thanking staff for being involved and leading this very extensive process, but it's the right process for a document that's important to the municipality in so many ways, and encourage you to adopt this guideline document. The other piece that I'd like to recommend that the committee add to the recommendation is that the biannual update that's referred to in the staff report be added to your deferred list. Having been around as long as I have, I know once it's on a deferred list, it then gets the attention it deserves. And I know staff have already put it into their work plan for 2023, but I think it would be appropriate for this committee to add it to its deferred list. Other than that, Madam Chair, again, I want to thank staff, the consultants. We've come a long way, and it might be a precedent that both EPAC and LDI are in the same place. We urge you to adopt, and we look forward to the biannual review. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Brendan Samuels.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thanks. Sorry, I'm just calling from the road. I want to echo Sandy's comments. I have been working with EPAC on the review of the environmental management guidelines for the last few years now. I want to thank staff for all the work that they've completed and for including us in this process. The guidelines definitely strengthen protections for the natural heritage system over their 2007 predecessor. So I would urge the planning committee to adopt the current draft of the environmental management guidelines. I would also suggest that given that we're incorporating new language into the guidelines, we're not going to know how effective some of the updated language is until the guidelines are put into place. So I would suggest, as Sandy recommended, that this be revisited in the future and that there be regular follow-up from staff to comment on how the implementation of the updated guidelines is going. I would also like to ask the committee if they can clarify with staff the nature of a certain piece of the guidelines concerning the use of citizen science data. I included a letter with the meeting agenda about why this is important. In Appendix C, data collection standards, it says it is recommended that reputable citizen science data sources, such as iNaturalist and the Ontario Reptile and Amphibian Atlas, be reviewed when conducting a background review, supplement data obtained by the consultant team. I would like to clarify whether this means that reviewing citizen science data sources is optional or it's expected and required. The reason this is important is because when consultants go out and do studies, they only really get a snapshot of what exists in a given study area. So species that are present, features and functions. And there are now, with today's technology, databases contributed by the public, which have records going back many years of species that were historically present. So I would like to clarify whether reviewing those data sets is something that is expected of proponents, because I think it will only contribute more data to make these studies more rigorous. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Samuels.
Mike Wallace.
Mr. Wallace, welcome.
It's Mike Wallace. I'm the representative of LDI. Been here many times. Appreciate it. I wore my green tie tonight, just, you know, environmental guidelines, thought it looked the part at least anyways. Listen, I'm also here. There was a letter we put forward in support of the guidelines as presented to be adopted. First of all, I also want to thank staff. They did include us and the Home Builders Association actively in discussing the present guidelines, the future guidelines, the guidelines that you're seeing in front of you. I'm assuming Emily Williamson will be glad she won't be hearing from me again for a while. So I do appreciate all the effort that went into this, because you know, these guidelines were from 2007. That's 15 years ago. There was a lot of work involved. We had obviously the issues with the COVID challenge and making sure we got this done. So we do appreciate that. A few things in here that we do appreciate. Look, let's be frank, we didn't agree with everything that's in here. I have 10 pages of changes that we wanted that we didn't get. We got some of them, but there were things we wanted to, but what was missing and what we're looking forward to is what the previous speakers talked about was an opportunity to review this. And it's every other year at this point, but we as we review the design manual, I don't know if you know this, but we just reviewed the design manual every year. We think this kind of document, these are guidelines that are going to be part of the London plan. They need to be reviewed. Science changes, and we need to make sure that we know what's working and what isn't working. We are fully supportive of helping and protecting the natural heritage here in London. But this document affects our industry 100%. We are the implementers of the design guidelines. The development, it says right in here, it's for the development. It's for the development community on how they should operate with the natural heritage here in London. So we like the changes that are happening in terms of there's an opportunity that for compensation, and that wasn't in the previous documents. We improvements to monitoring. We are supportive, not necessarily agreeing with everything, but we're supportive of an update that was well overdue. And we appreciate staff's effort. We appreciate the recognition that this needs to be done on a more regular basis. And I can guarantee you we'll be at the table giving you our input as we did this time. And again, thank you for putting this together and making it happen. And we look forward to working with you guys in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to make a comment? I see none. I'll ask one more time if there's anyone from the public that would like to make comments. I see none, and with that, committee, I'd like to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Hillier. And with that, we can vote.
Chair, I'll vote yes, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Committee members on questions, comments. I'd like to follow up with Mr. Samuel's question from the public participation meeting around the citizen science-based consultation process and how it's going to be implemented in the environmental guidelines. So, Ms. Williamson, if I can go to you.
Through the chair, Emily Williamson. With respect to citizen science, we included language in Appendix C around should, strictly because in all cases, not every single database will be relevant to a given site. It is something that we include. It is something that we allow for professional consultants to use their judgment. And it's not just these platforms that we potentially get information from. Local naturalists, there's always opportunities to have baseline data sets and background, but it's important to note that that background then constitutes a trigger for potential studies. So the data itself, we need to include citizen science as the starting point from which it's verified by our consultants, not as a means to create habitat, if you will. So it's just finding that balance. So we did include should language, again, the site-specific item, allowing for professional consultants to be professional consultants and ecologists and go out and do their work. And just noting that not all potential habitat is verifiable necessarily in every case.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to go to committee members. Any questions? Councillor Lehman.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
And I have a seconder in Councillor Turner. Councillor Turner?
Thank you. And if I might, perhaps it's friendly to Councillor Lehman's motion that we also add the biannual review to council's or the committee's deferred matters list.
If we can just have a moment to get that included. I know was mentioned by a number of people from the public to have it included. And that would be added to the deferral list.
That is, of course, if it's amenable to Councillor Lehman.
Councillor Lehman?
If I may, through you, Chair, just ask a question to staff regarding
Yes.
that. Yeah, through you, then staff. Will this add to, is this a good way to address this with, I'm cautious of adding to staff the workload. I hear from all parties that an update is important. I just want to hear their opinion on the need for a biannual update, or would an annual update work better for them?
If I can go to staff, and I know we're just referring to updates, biannual updates.
Correct. I just want to know if a biannual update is kind of the preferred way. I know an update is needed. I'm just trying to get an idea of timing for staff. Is it effective, I guess, to have a biannual update, or is it, in their opinion, most effective to have an annual update?
Through the chair, it's Greg Barrett speaking. We're recommending that this be a biennial update, not an annual update. There's a bit of a difference between this and a design manual. The reason for the biennial update, quite honestly, is we want to make sure this works. And as members of this committee know, and members of council, environmental matters, just even on an application, very often go for 3 seasons. So they even would extend beyond a year just on a single application. So to get some sense that the guidelines were working or whether or not there were issues with it, I would suggest to you that doing that every year is not really going to solve or give you much information, but there is a commitment and a recommendation that we come back at least every 2 years. And that's based, I think, one of the first sentences in Ms. Williamson's presentation was that council last approved this comprehensive package in 2007. And staff, the ecological and environmental community, and the development community realizes that that's way too long for a document like this to be sitting without a revision. And so that's one of the reasons why this revision process took so long. But it's also one of the reasons why in our recommendation to you that we come back and we do this every 2 years. So I think that that's the appropriate period of time for us to see how they're working after this first go round, and then subsequent go rounds after that. We can get a chance and make sure that they're working, and certainly not leave it for a 14-year gap before we come back and give them a revision. With respect to putting on the deferred matters list, that certainly, I mean, that could be the will of the committee, but I just sort of say that that's certainly something that's very unusual, that at the same time that you're actually seeing something and adopting it in the first instance, you're going to say, oh, and put it on your list to come back. That is part of our recommendation. And I know as staff, notwithstanding the comment from Mr. Levin, we do know the things that are priorities. We do keep records of those things that we make the commitments to you. And as noted, it's already in our work plan to make sure that we do come back on this. But to have it popping up every 2 months for the next 2 years is sort of going to be, I think, just perhaps a little bit of an overkill to say, come back, come back, come back, when in fact we're making that commitment to you. Thank you.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand what staff are saying here. As far as the deferred matters list, it's implicit that we'd be directing them to come back on a biannual basis. I'd be curious just to hear the mover of that friendly amendment, you know, his thoughts on that.
That's for you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I think it works either way. I mean, it might be a redundant motion. It's a paragraph or a sentence in our deferred matters list that comes back to us. It could be handled a couple of ways, as Mr. Barrett identified. They have a timeline on it. The only challenge is that this is going to bridge terms of council. So it depends on what the composition of next council is and how much kind of quote unquote corporate memory there is. So it helps as kind of an aide memoir for the new members of the committee coming on. But I'm good either way. I'm assured by Mr. Barrett's statements that it is on the work plan and it would return. But I think that the planning staff have that same risk that they might have attrition or movement through the organization, and it could get lost in that too. So it's just one way of keeping it on the radar.
Mayor Holder.
Thanks, Chair. We don't wipe the slate clean with the new council. If it's deferred matters, they carry on. I appreciate Mr. Barrett's comments about biannual review. I think that makes some sense. I'm pleased that Councillor Turner is amenable to that. If that is ultimately how it goes, I think that makes a world of sense to have that. And if there's something urgent comes in between that needs review, I would say to you that we will deal with that, because this particular committee and various groups who are committed to it will keep us accountable as well. And this will live on between council terms. So I would imagine that if we have this every 2-year review, knowing as issues come forward, that we would deal with them as they come up. That seems to me to make a world of sense. And I don't think I need to jump into first or second. I think that Councillor Turner has acknowledged it. I think Councillor Lehman has seconded it, but I'll leave it for them to confirm it. But if not, I'm happy to come back in on any part of that as you wish. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too think that the fact that the biannual view is already recommended by staff, you know, to me, quite honestly, that's sufficient. And I say this with all due respect to Mr. Levin. I don't think when the deferred matters list just gets longer and longer and longer with things, it's actually really that helpful in providing a reminder. And in fact, I'm mindful of the last Community and Protective Services Committee, and right at the very first meeting, Councillor Helmer was chairing, and we actually went over the deferred matters list in terms of what could be removed. Because in fact, sometimes items stay on the list, they don't even get noticed for removal, and they've been completed. And also what items we are going to really focus on making sure that the committee cleared off. And we did those and shrunk that deferred matters list considerably. Quite a number of items which didn't need our reminder because staff brought them back as promised and they were delivered on. So I understand the desire for the reminder. I'm not really enthusiastic about just adding it to the deferred matters list. I think that our staff do a very commendable job of carrying things over as staff transitions happen. And I think that councillors as well, whether it's this iteration of council or obviously as this is going to stretch terms, the next iteration of council, there are lots of folks out in the community who will, as the mayor mentioned, also be looking to keep us accountable on this. So, I mean, this isn't one that I feel particularly strongly about either way, and the direction the committee goes, I mean, I'm fine to support the staff recommendation. I'm always cautious about adding things to the deferred matters list for the sake of just putting in a reminder that we have to revisit them. Those reports come back to us as staff are able to produce them, and so I'm comfortable in trusting that they will do so.
Are there any other comments from committee members? I see none. I'd like to make a comment from the chair and appreciate everyone's comments. I guess we're debating.
Strongly vote either way, and the direction the committee goes, I mean, I'm fine to support.
Just one moment, please. I'm not sure who was speaking there, but I think we heard you.
That was me, the live stream lags.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. So that was just a lag in the live stream. So I'll just proceed, speaking from the chair. And here we're debating if it should go on the deferral list or not. I have no problem having it go on the deferral list. I think it is a reminder. And as we change councils and as staff changes, to have that on there, I'm sure the stakeholders in the community will hold us accountable. It is in the recommendation that it be reviewed on an annual basis, but we do not have a long list. And I think it could be easily, if it's not making sense, be removed down the road, but having it put on the deferral list there's no harm in having that as a reminder. These are important guidelines that need to be updated. And it just makes us aware as a committee as to that they exist. And there's a lot of work that's gone into it, and how we update them is going to be important in the future. So I am supportive of putting it on the list. I could go, I'll just leave it at that. I'll go back to Councillor Turner to follow up, but Councillor Turner?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if I think Councillor Lehman had the floor, and I just seconded and asked for that amendment. I'm happy to make comments on the motion in general once the floor is mine, but I think it's Councillor Lehman before me.
Councillor Lehman?
Thank you. At the risk of playing ping pong, my concern was echoed. I want to keep a clean deferred matters list. However, I'll support a friendly amendment with Councillor Turner if that's the direction he believes we should go. He's been a councillor over a couple of terms, but maybe his mind has been changed a bit just hearing the desire to keep a cleaner deferred matters list. So ping pong back to Councillor Turner.
And if I can just, before I go to Councillor Turner, I would like to go to Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I didn't mean to come in and speak at this point in your thing. I just wanted, after you voted, before you were all done with this matter, I just wish to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, great. If we can keep it on, then I think that would be best. This is, maybe I'll make my quick comments right now then as to why. What you heard from community members and the development community was really important. This is a really fundamental document, and it's really important that it's as up to date as possible. Because this creates the framework for environmental impact studies, and it allows developers to know what's expected when they move forward with developments adjacent to environmental areas and environmental features. The ambiguity of out-of-date recommendations and guidelines creates a lot of conflict and creates a lot of unneeded delay in the planning process because there's a lot of dispute over of the interpretation of a lot of the items. I spent 9 years on the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee. The environmental management guidelines were almost a Bible to us, and it was the lens through which we looked at all environmental impact studies. And it's also that lens that the consultants for the developers use as they're preparing environmental impact studies for staff in their applications. So you heard Mr. Wallace talk about how helpful this is. And I think this is a really important context for all the development discussions that we have, is having a clear framework and a clear guidelines for how development occurs within the city is helpful to the development industry. It's not a hindrance. It's good to be able to identify what the parameters for development are, and the biannual review allows us to come to the table and to continue the discussion. So it's a live discussion, and this document is a living document. So it's great to see that recognition of it. It's been 14 years, as Ms. Williamson and Mr. Barrett have both identified. That's a long time. And so that's part of the reason for the bit of the apprehension for not having it on the deferred matters list, is because this has been an item that has needed update for a long time. I'm so excited that we're here at this point, but I want to make sure that the progress on this isn't lost, and that the momentum is still there, because I think it does need to be front of mind, considering the importance of this specific document to helping how development proceeds within the city.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. I'd like to go to Mayor Holder.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. You know, I've heard this, and you know what, I have deep respect for what Councillors Turner and even what I've heard Councillor Lehman saying about trying to be thoughtful and sensitive to these issues. What I've also heard from staff is that they have a very specific intention toward a biennial review. So every 2 years, that's back up on the table. And I'm mindful of Councillor Lewis saying that, you know what, we need to clean up lists, otherwise it's talking about talking, and we in politics do that too often. But here's the beauty of this. We know that staff have acknowledged that this is something that comes up as part of that review. So my sincere intention is to not support it going on the deferred matters list. And if that's ultimately the motion, and I will ask the chair to share what that is, I will not support it. But I will support the fact that staff are going to deal with this as appropriate, because you know what, we're really good in politics of giving attributable make work projects that are already in place, and we may hurry it up, and sometimes that makes sense. But I think this biennial review is fair and makes sense. So Chair, when it comes to the motion, assuming we've got that already in place, but if not, I need to understand exactly what that is, please, so that we can deal with it accordingly. But from my perspective, I think staff have this well in hand. I think they're mindful of what the requirements need to be. So I'll look to you for some advice as to what that actually looks like. Thank you.
So I think we don't want to lose the motion, and maybe we can just pull this out as an amendment. Can we do that? And then I could go to the clerk. Yes, and I'll go to Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, if it's cleaner for everyone, let me take it off as a friendly amendment. I'll make it as a second amendment. So I'll second Councillor Lehman's motion. I will make an amendment, and we can hear those as separate votes. So we can have the main motion, which is the acceptance and the adoption of the environmental management guidelines, and I would second Councillor Lehman's motion on that. I would also propose an amendment that additionally, or maybe even a part B, that additionally that the biannual review, as mentioned in the EMGs, is also added to the for the committee's deferred matters list. And I would look for a seconder for that.
Okay, we'll do one thing at a time. So we'll go on the main motion. Councillor Turner is seconding the main motion. And now we can speak to the amendment. And I'm not sure if clerks is ready to proceed with a clause B at this moment to add the biannual review on the deferred matters list. And I know the mayor has asked for that as well. So can we just get clarification on B part.
So right now, the staff recommendation, there's a part A and a part B. So the current staff recommendation that on the recommendation of the Director of Planning and Development, the following actions be taken with respect to the Environmental Management Guidelines update. Part A, the Environmental Management Guidelines appended to the staff report dated December 13th, 2021 as Appendix 1 to Appendix A be adopted as a municipal council guideline document. And Part B, the proposed bylaw appended to the staff report dated December 13th, 2021 as Appendix A be introduced at the municipal council meeting to be held on December 21st, 2021 to adopt the environmental management guidelines appended to the staff report dated December 13th, 2021 in accordance with London Plan Policy 1713. So that is the main recommendation. Then for Part C as a secondary recommendation, the biannual review as outlined in the Environmental Management Guidelines be added to the Planning and Environment Committee deferred matters list.
And I just want to get agreement from the mover of that amendment, which is now C. And I guess we need a seconder for that.
Do you want to vote on the main motion and then deal with the amendment?
We can go with the main motion and then the amendment. I'm at the will of the committee here. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just thinking procedurally, it should be the amendment first and then the main motion as amended if the amendment passes.
I would agree. So let's go on the amendment, which is now added as a C. And Mayor Holder?
Could I ask the clerk just to read C again? I don't have the advantage at home or somewhere else where I might be, but it is home to look that up on eScribe. So could I that be shared, please?
Yes.
Part C, the biannual review as outlined in the Environmental Management Guidelines be added to the Planning and Environment Committee deferred matters list.
Has that been duly seconded, Chair, and or can I comment if it has been?
I think there is a motion on the floor by Councillor Turner. I will second it.
So, Chair, can I comment, please?
Yes.
So in the spirit of the never-ending lists, and I'm mindful what Councillor Helmer did to clean up deferred matters, I have no doubt that the people who are committed to these issues will ensure that this council and future councils will pay attention to such matters. I'm not sure that, frankly, I want to add another piece to the deferred matters list, so I'm going to vote against this particular amendment. Thank you.
And just before we proceed, I would like to go to Ms. Westlake Power.
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to provide a little bit of procedural clarity, if I may. You are at committee, so these can be voted on separately. And then when the recommendation as a whole comes forward to council, it will be an A, B, and C, but it's not necessary to amend the motion and then vote on the motion as amended. The C part, the addition, can be voted on separately from the staff recommendation, and we'll just move forward from there. And I hope that's helpful.
It is.
So, Chair, may I ask that that be separated, please?
It is.
Thank you.
And with that, any other comments from the committee on the motion?
Sorry, Chair, with the disadvantage of not having eScribe, the motion, which part, all of it, or C, what are we referencing, please?
We're going to have it, we can pull A, B, and C separate when we vote, but I'm looking for comments from committee. Councillor Lehman.
I would recommend that we vote on, we can tie A and B together and then vote on C separately.
yes, we can do that, A and B, and then C separately. I am looking at committee again for any comments. And if you allow me, I've got a couple questions from the chair as it relates to these changes and how they are going to move forward. I'll just make some comments here about the importance of having this update from 2007. It's been a long time coming, and it really is important given the significant changes that have occurred through our 2 new PPSs and the London plan, and also the importance of science knowledge and how that is needed to be updated. These are, I want to thank staff for the consultation and the work that they started 3 years ago on this. It's been a long time coming, and it's good to have it here, and it's good to support these new guidelines. I do have a couple questions to staff as it relates to the monitoring and the compensation, the site-specific compensation, how that is going to work moving forward. I know there's some sort of, a lot of work that needs to be done here. And I'd like to have a general idea how we can expect this work to be done when it comes to the monitoring and the work that needs to be done around the compensation. To staff.
Madam Chair, it's Matt Felberg speaking. I can speak to monitoring, and then I'll throw it over to one of my colleagues to talk a little bit about the compensation. We've actually got a couple draft plans over the past couple of years where we've included monitoring through to the build-out phase. And we're at a point now, we haven't reached the point yet where we can actually start to assess that information. We haven't got to the assumption stage. So there's still a little bit of work to do there, but we do on a regular basis assess the efficacy of sediment erosion control measures, and we're always checking on those to see how the limits between features and the development are carrying forward through the build out. But in addition, in the 2019 DC study, we included a new program that was called a post-assumption monitoring program. And that funding was allocated so that we could go back and look at some of the older developments in town and see how the recommendations from the EIS have gone over the build out, post assumption, and all that, all the work since then. The consultant has finished their first year of monitoring, and we're just going through the data right now, and the plan is to report back to EPAC and Planning Committee sometime in 2022. And not to bring up the deferred matters list, but there is an item on the deferred matters list talking about homeowner packages. And one of the things that we're planning on doing is using some of the recommendations or information we received from the consultant to help inform how we can improve those homeowner packages and identify what it is that folks are living adjacent to. So with that, I'll throw it over to Ms. Williamson or Mr. Edwards to talk a little bit about compensation.
Thank you for that information. Ms. Williamson?
Through the chair, Emily Williamson. In terms of the compensation section of the EMG, section 6, we put in wording specific to a forthcoming framework. Toronto Region Conservation Authority has set out an excellent example of what this could look like, but there's substantial back of house pieces that need to be resolved. And in effect, this is a project in and of itself. So we have included appropriate language within the EMGs to allow for updates, and as per the biennial update process, we will be able to incorporate the changes once this appendix is completed. We intend to include public consultation technical expert consultation as part of this. So with the various external groups that have been involved in the process thus far. It will also provide a little bit more information on what that compensation is going to look like. So certainly through the April 18th London Plan Appeal resolution, we do have specific policies in place that speak to the fact that in certain instances, while following the mitigation hierarchy, where we avoid, we limit the disturbance to the natural heritage system, and then we mitigate before we even consider compensation. We have, we included numerous other pieces. So at this time, we do feel that the compensation piece is unfinished. We look forward to resolving it as part of upcoming works in the subsequent year. And I will pass it back to you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that information. I think it's important for us to know that there's still some work to be done, and that compensation in particular is still a last resort. So I really am supportive of the changes. It's pretty important that we move forward with this, and thank staff for all the work that they've done. I see Mayor Holders.
Yes, I also want to honor, thank you, Chair. I want to honor our staff for what they have said with regard to dealing with these issues. But we're coming a long way from whether or not something gets on a deferred matters list or not. And so I'm just trying to pull it a little bit tighter and saying, what was the original objective? So we kind of sometimes forget that while we're surrounded by alligators, kind of curious to imagine that our original objective was to clear the swamp. All we're trying to do here, I think, and you'll correct me, I'm sure you will, that what we're trying to do is decide what goes on a deferred matters list or not. My God, I think we've gone every which way on this issue. And the real question is, how do we make sure that we hold each other to account to make sure these things get done in a thoughtful and proper way? That's all. And I'm confident the staff can help us do that. So I'm going to go back to the original mover and seconder. I think I almost forget the motion now, but I really do appreciate that we're trying to have a thoughtful discussion, but let's just kind of get this done, because this feels painful that we're trying to get to what I think is actually a fairly simple place. So please help me understand it a bit, Chair, if you would, please.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, happy to do that. So we have the original recommendation A and B together. So we are going to be adopting it, and we're introducing the bylaw moving forward. And then there is that C clause that is going to allow for the biannual review to go on the deferral matters list. That is the C clause, and we're separating that out. So you can vote on A and B, and then C separately. And with that, if I don't see any committee comments, I will go to Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was having a hard time opening my mic. I just want to take this time to pass on some thanks and appreciation to all the folks who have been involved. This has been a long process. It actually started back in August of 2019. And it started back in August of 2019 in pre-consultation with what we called the external review groups. And that was members of the development community, members of the ecological environment community, and the First Nations. And this process has been actually, while it's been long, it's been a great process. And I believe that the outcome that's in front of you this evening is actually a great outcome from that process. In between all of this, and what made it take a little bit longer, was that we finally had the London Plan hearings dealing with the natural heritage matters. And once those matters were dispensed with, we had a solid policy basis on which to go forward and make sure that these guidelines were appropriate to implement those policies. And so what's in front of you, while we've only been at this for about 45 minutes this evening, is really 2.5 years worth of work. And it's 2.5 years worth of work, not just by staff, but by those external resource groups who we dealt with. The development community came to the table. They came to the table willing to talk. They came to the table with written comments, which was very helpful. The same thing from the ecological and environmental communities. And so I just really felt it was appropriate to take this time to thank those folks. And also, I've really got to thank our staff. Emily Williamson has been living and breathing these things for quite some time. And we told her that this was going to be her Christmas present, that in fact we'd get that done and Santa was going to come early. And I'm not presupposing what's going to come out of this vote this evening, but it sounds like, in fact, Santa might deliver. And I just want to pass on my thanks to Emily and to Kevin Edwards for shepherding this process through on the staff side. And then to those consultants we brought in to help us through this, AECOM at the outset, and then Margot Yersick, who worked with us on the London Plan appeals. This was a lot of work. This is a really, really good document that's in front of you. We're very, very comfortable with it. We know it reflects the latest and greatest thinking, and I think that this council can be very proud of the fact that they are ensuring that London actually stays at the forefront in this province on dealing with environmental matters and making sure that we all know how we're going to deal with these policies and how we're going to make sure that London moves forward in the future with a great, strong, conserved, maintained, and enhanced natural environment, but at the same time providing for appropriate development. And we're very, very happy to have this in front of you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Councillor Turner.
Oh, that was a reaction. That was my applause. That wasn't mine.
I quite agree. It's a good day. And I see no further comments from committee. We can proceed to vote, and just a reminder that we are going to be voting on A and B first, which is the staff's recommendation.
Chair, I'll vote yes to that. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Chair, can I ask that the next piece be read, please?
Yes.
Part C, the biannual review as outlined in the Environmental Management Guidelines be added to the Planning and Environment Committee Deferred Matters list.
And we're opening up the vote.
Chair, I'll vote no. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion loses on a tie vote.
And with that, we will be, it's a tie vote, so there is no recommendation coming from the Planning Committee on C. With that, we'll move on to the next and our last public participation meeting for the evening is 3.9. And this is on 50 King Street, a demolition request. Committee members, let's open up the PPM. Councillor Lewis, Councillor Lehman.
Chair, I'll vote yes. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And if a brief presentation.
Thank you. This is Kyle Gonyu, Heritage Planner. This is a demolition request for the existing building located at 50 King Street within the Downtown Heritage Conservation District, designated pursuant to Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The property was formerly part of the Courthouse Block property, but was severed by Middlesex County in 2014 and sold to the current property owner in 2019. The Courthouse Block was the historic center for the administration of justice in the London District, At its zenith, it included the courthouse, the jail, the police station, the county administrative building or the surrogate court annex, the county registry office, and the city registry office. Of those buildings, only the courthouse and jail remain. The courthouse is a National Historic Site of Canada, protected by an easement held by the Ontario Heritage Trust, as well as individually heritage designated. The jail is also individually heritage designated. The whole area is designated as part of the Downtown Heritage Conservation District, which came into force in 2013. The building at 50 King Street was designed by architect David C. Stevens and built by Quinney Construction. It was opened by Premier Leslie Frost in 1959 as the Middlesex Municipal Building. It housed the county's administrative offices, the county library, and the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food. The building was the seat of Middlesex County Council from 1959 until 1981. As the debate regarding the courthouse block was settled with the restoration of the courthouse and jail in the late 70s and early 80s, the county's administrative and council chambers moved into those buildings. A major renovation was planned, but was changed in the design and materials with a much more subdued building designed by the architect Norbert Schuller and constructed by Patrick Enright Construction in 1986. The renovations left very few remnants of the original buildings, and I'm referring to images 15 and 16 on pages 719 and 720 of the PEC agenda in the staff report. The building was opened by Premier David Peterson. It was home to what is now known as the Middlesex London Health Unit, which remained in the building until March of 2020. The building is currently vacant. The Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan ranks the property at 50 King Street as C-ranked, non-heritage property with an institutional public realm landscape character. For more explanation on what these mean, I'd refer you to Appendix A, starting on page 709 of the PEC agenda with addeds. The existing property is low on the ranked scale due to its previous major renovations dating after the critical period to the historic development of the Downtown Heritage Conservation District. Demolition is discouraged as a final and irreversible act by the applicable policy framework of the Provincial Policy Statement, the London Plan, and the Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan. The policies of Section 4.6 of the Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan state that demolition may be appropriate, quote, occasionally redevelopment that is in keeping with appropriate city policies. Pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Municipal Council may approve with terms and conditions, or refuse the demolition request. Given the ranking and assignment of the property at 50 King Street by the Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan, staff are recommending that the demolition be permitted with terms and conditions. Documentation through photographs and measured drawings is intended to create a permanent archival record of the building prior to its demolition. This is a consistent recommendation of demolitions within a heritage conservation district in accordance with policy 567 of the London Plan and can be used to assist in future commemorative activities. To ensure that adjacent cultural heritage resources are not adversely affected and sufficiently protected by any demolition activities, a demolition plan is required. There are sensitive archaeological resources, including burials within the courthouse block. Should an area identified as requiring further archaeological assessment be included within the work area for the demolition, further archaeological assessment shall be required. To manage the interim condition between the demolition of the existing building and the redevelopment of the property, a landscape plan is required. The landscape plan will be required to ensure that the treatment is in a manner appropriate to its location and adjacency. A grass lawn is required and is anticipated to be accompanied by retention of trees north of the existing building, as well as the hoarding of this site. This site hoarding needs to be appropriate to its location and adjacency and should celebrate the courthouse and the courthouse block in the development of the London area. Historic images of the courthouse block on the hoarding is suggested. A security is required to ensure the appropriate implementation of this landscape plan. There are 2 plaques still within the building. commemorating the 1959 and 1986 openings. These are images 17 and 18 on pages 720 and 721 of the agenda. Those plaques need to be salvaged prior to the building's demolition. Commemoration of the Middlesex Municipal Building and the Courthouse Block need to be addressed through future heritage impact assessment for the redevelopment. Heritage alteration permit approval is also required for future development. As future development is anticipated at this location, it brings an opportunity for compatible, sensitive, and brilliantly designed emblem of civic pride befitting its location adjacent to the most historically significant place in London. I would just like to point out, as has been previous, that the Latch was consulted on the demolition request at its meeting earlier this month. The Latch did have a slightly different comment on the demolition with the addition to the staff recommendation, and I'm quoting from their report. It be further noted that this site is an important cultural heritage landscape and should continue to be part of an institutional and public realm landscape in the Downtown Heritage Conservation District. From the notice that was circulated, I received 4 phone inquiries about the demolition request as well as 1 written inquiry. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. Any technical questions from committee members? I see none. I will go to the applicant. If the applicant is not here, I would like to go to the public.
Kelly McKeating.
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The mandate of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario is to work to protect the best examples of Ontario's architectural heritage and also to protect its places of natural beauty. And specific to London region, that is what ACO London works towards. The building at 50 King Street, excuse me, is not, as Mr. Gagnon has said, it's not an outstanding example of architecture of any era, even though it does have some important municipal and county significance. We're expecting that both this committee and council will accept the staff's recommendation to approve the demolition request. And we don't object to that. But what we would like to state our support for is the staff's recommendation to require an appropriate temporary landscape plan. The county courthouse is a beautiful building surrounded by grass, surrounded by trees, and that park-like setting would be detracted from if there was a parking lot or something put in place of that building. So hopefully that condition will be put on the demolition application. The other thing that the ACO would like to ask about is in the past, City Council has on occasion made an approved site plan for a replacement building a condition for the demolition. That's probably not something that council would be interested in entertaining at this juncture, given the uncertainty of the timeline of the property owner's plans for that site. But just in general, I wanted to remind the PEC that has been done in the past. And I thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you, Ms. McKeating. And is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak to this demolition request? I hear and see none, and with that, I'd like to go to committee members to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Turner, and we are to vote.
Mayor Holder? Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And with that, I'll go to committee members. I'd like to also acknowledge the ward councillor, Councillor Fife Millar, being here with us, and looking to the committee for a motion, comments. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm prepared to move the staff recommendation to approve the demolition permit. I'm also quite supportive of the idea of putting in, some short-term landscaping features until we see progress move forward. So I'll move the staff recommendation, and then once that's on the floor, if there's a seconder, I will offer a couple of more comments.
Looking for a seconder. Mayor Holder?
Thanks very much, and apologies, in the last vote, I wasn't able to vote, but Chair, I'm happy to second this, but I would also remind colleagues that there's already some commitment that, if I've read this correctly, where notwithstanding the concerns which can be expressed have already been articulated, I think, by the applicant, that they're willing to do so. But if we want to say it again to reinforce it, then I absolutely support that. But we in politics, we like to chew our food twice sometimes. And I'm very mindful that in this case here, I think the applicant's committed to that, but I defer to staff if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.
And Mayor Holder, if I can ask the question, if you could be a little bit more specific to staff. Was that a question to staff?
Well, I guess specific, I'm seconding. And if that allows me, and I don't want to preempt Councillor Lewis, who did indicate he wanted to speak, a confirmation to staff that the applicant has already agreed to the terms of appropriate foliage and or sodding or whatever it is that we have asked of them to this point. So we don't have to belabor that, or perhaps we do. But I would really like to understand from staff if that's the understanding.
Thank you. And through the chair, this is Kyle Gonyu, Heritage Planner. Staff will be working with the applicant to develop the landscape plan. It's understood that the landscape plan will be a combination of both grassed area, retention of as many trees as possible, but is also anticipated to have hoarding. And it's suggested that that hoarding to protect the construction site be better than average, that's befitting its location. And that's where the historic images have been suggested to celebrate the history of the courthouse block as it's awaiting its future development.
Thanks, Chair. I'll take that as a yes, I think.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as I indicated, it wasn't trying to chew it twice. I was just commenting that was part of the staff recommendation through you to Mayor Holder. But I do appreciate his caution about wanting to make things redundant. I did want to just offer a couple of comments on some of the public and latch commentary that we've heard around this property as well. In supporting this demolition permit, I want to be really clear that first of all, this building this property is no longer in public hands as it once was. This is not going to be a public realm in the same way that it was in the past. And certainly it's in the hands of a developer who has been very generous in the community in providing connectivity spaces and green spaces on and around their properties. And so I'm not suggesting that it's going to be closed off to the public, but it is no longer a public property. And it is in the downtown core where we absolutely need intensification. And I would imagine that when the developer does bring forward an application, we'll see some mixed usage there, as is encouraged, with some commercial ground floor and then residential spaces above. But I think, you know, it's just important for me right now to share that I don't expect the developer to come back with something that is, you know, a 8-10 story sort of thing. I expect we're going to see a very vibrant application, but I expect that it's going to be very intense as well, because that's what we need to see in the downtown core. So I just think it's important people are mindful. Streetscapes change over time, Heritage Conservation District or not. We have to have opportunities for new development to come in. And yes, it should be complementary to other uses and other components of the downtown. But I look at the time that Mr. Gagnon laid out in his report to us, and I think of all of the changes that have happened to the downtown in the really couple of decades now since that building was originally built. There's quite a number of new towers in the sky. There's quite a number of new developments in and around the core area. So the one thing that I want to emphasize as we move forward on this tonight is I'm not looking for demolition permit contingent on site plan. We will get a project that's come forward. The developer may not need to do a whole lot of landscape planning if they bring forward an application sooner than later. As is indicated in the report, this is contingent on redevelopment starting. So the sooner they get moving on that, perhaps, you know, we're not going to do landscaping in December. The sod is done for the season. We wouldn't see that till spring. So it may be we see something being built there sooner than later. But what I do know is that it's going to be a great redevelopment for the downtown, because we need to see that space brought alive in a way that it hasn't been since it's been vacated.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Any other comments from committee members? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's going to be weird to vote to demolish my old workplace, but that's what I get to do. I think the application is appropriate. This site's already been rezoned with bonusing. There's a form locked in. I wouldn't be surprised if the applicant at some point came forward with a revision, but I think it's set for a 28-story building. So there's really no surprises that development occurs on this site. It's been fully contemplated and approved. And so what moves forward here, I think we'll look for, actually, I think since it was done with bonusing, the form is locked in. Unless, of course, they revisit and we come up with something else, or they come up with something else and ask us to do that change. Nonetheless, I think if it's going to be a little bit of time before development occurs, it makes a lot of sense that as quickly as possible the site is remediated in the interim and provides that that interface between the forks of the Thames. It's a pretty key site. I think the applicant knows what they have, and they've certainly given a commitment to develop it as such. Yeah, anyway, at this point, there's really no reason to decline the application for demolition. It's been long contemplated, and this is just really a formality at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. I see no other committee members. Before I go to Councillor Lewis, I will go to the ward councillor, Mr. Fife-Miller, or Councillor Fife-Miller. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, I want to thank everybody from PEC tonight for letting me sit in here. It's been enlightening. I think a couple things, and I think Councillor Turner used a good term. I think there's no surprise that we're here right now. We would have been expecting that we would be here. I think a couple of things with this site as it sits right now, talking to a lot of the constituents in the downtown and in and around that area. I think this building coming down right now will, I'm going to say we'll take care of a few concerns, one of them being a safety aspect in and around that property. That property right now sort of sits out of the mainstream of what is the downtown, and can be a little bit of a magnet probably for more nefarious activity in the downtown than we want to see. I fully support in item C, no addition to commercial or accessory parking in this area. There is parking there right now, which is, I'm going to say, highly underutilized at this point in time. I think this building coming down probably will make that parking more user-friendly, especially when you're talking to some of the female business owners who are using the downtown. I think they find that parking a little bit, I'm going to say off using right now. I think the other thing on timing, one of the things that we all get to see when we pass there on a regular basis, and I'm sure Councillor Turner saw this a lot, is there's a lot of wedding activity that takes place in the summer months there. I think important that we get this done in the off months, because I'm sure there's a lot of events booked in there to take place in the warmer months as they come around. I was really happy to hear Mr. Gagno's comments on the hoarding and having the hoarding be respectful of the location that it represents. I think a lot of people walk past that area, and I think having hoarding that's representative of the area and what the area means to London is very, very important. And I think the last piece, and Councillor Lewis spoke to this, this is where our city started. This is where we came from. We know we need intensification in our downtown core. I see no better area for it to bloom from than at the Forks of our Thames. I think this is a great opportunity. I think it's an opportunity for the downtown to really shine from that point. So I think there's a lot of great things here. I am happy to see this come forward, and I'm extremely happy to hear from my colleagues their support for this. So thank you.
Thank you. Always appreciate the ward councillor's comments. I'll go to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to say, as a point of personal privilege, I'm kind of jealous of Councillor Turner. Now, I've thought of a couple former workplaces that I'd like to see demolition permits come in for too.
Thank you for that. Mayor Holder.
Well, thanks, Chair. I've been thinking about the comments, and I could be really clever with Councillor Lewis, but I shan't be about some of his former employer spots. But let's think a little bit about what Councillor Fife Miller referenced. And what strikes me about this is that what we may be establishing through this process, which I find interesting, is the new heart of downtown. So typically it used to be, I suppose, Dundas and Richmond, which was that crossroads. But I'm wondering, as we look to develop and we see the development potential along the river on the right out west side, closest to the river, with more than one developer looking to put some pretty interesting properties there, we may well be seeing the new heart of London. I'm very curious to see how this development goes, and I'll be very interested to see what this developer and certainly one other that we have previously approved do to impact intensification of downtown, while at the same time potentially creating a new heart. So very interested in what that looks like. So thank you for letting me add that extra comment. And with deep respect to Councillor Lewis, I hope none of his prior employment places get torn down unless he really wants them to. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. And with that, I do not see any other comments from committee members. And if the committee will allow me, just a brief comment from the chair here with this demolition request. I am supporting it, and really, I think there's a lot of history here. I recall when I came onto council maybe 7 years ago, there were applications to have it demolished, and we know that some form of intensity is going to happen here. How we balance that with the cultural landscape, I have confidence that the applicant will do that, and really want to acknowledge the landscaping plan. I think that is really going to be important, and the preservations of the plaques as well. It's funny when we talk about history and we refer to names that are very familiar to me. I can't believe it's part of history, but I think it's really some great opportunities that can happen in this area. So with that, I see no further comments. We have a motion on the floor, and we'll open it up.
Chair, it's the mayor. I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
On to a 4.3, I think we're moving on to 4.3, and this is a request for a council resolution, and we do have a request for delegation status. I assume Mr. Kirkness is here. He's not, so I think we can proceed with the request for a council resolution. Since there's no need to get a request for delegation status, we can go right to the request that the applicant is seeking approval for a municipal council to provide for the submission of a minor variance. And for committee members, we haven't seen one for quite a while. We used to get quite a few of these, but it's the Committee of Adjustments that will be making the decision. We are just making the decision to refer it or not. So with that, I will look for a motion or comments. Councillor Lewis.
I'm just going to move this, Madam Chair. I have no problem with this request, so we can move the referral to the Committee of Adjustment.
And I'll need a seconder in Councillor Lehman. And any further comments? Councillor Turner.
Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on this one. Were there any specific concerns from staff? I see a report from Ms. Saunders about this, but from a planning perspective, is this contrary to anything that that we wanted to remain seized with as a committee or a council?
Through the chair, it's Mr. Barrett speaking. Quite honestly, we've not looked at this. This is merely a matter of whether or not council would consider the minor variance, the application. In reading the report that was prepared by the clerks, it would appear that that the applicant is proposing a different form of development. So the way I'm reading between the lines is that some of the provisions that are in there with respect to some of the regulations may no longer apply.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. And if I can bring committee members' attention to Mr. Kirkness's letter, and he does note that there's going to be no gas bar, and they're going to be increasing the retail service in this commercial space. So with that, it has greatly altered the site design upon which the adopted zoning amendment was based on. So there are changes to it. It's really up to committee to, I guess, refer this over or not.
And with that, thank you, through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Barrett, and I think that's helpful. If we don't have an interest in this, then it's probably appropriate to sit with Committee of Adjustment.
Thank you. Any further comments? Just one moment, please. And the clerk will read the recommendation out loud.
That the following actions be taken with respect to the property located at 1919 to 1929 Oxford Street West, Part A. On the recommendation of the city clerk, the report dated December 13th, 2020, 2021 and entitled Request for Council Resolution under Section 45 bracket 1.4 bracket of the Planning Act 1990 CP 13-1919 to 1929 Oxford Street West be received for information, and Part B, the request to accept a minor variance application relating to the property located at 1919 to 1929 Oxford Street West be approved.
Thank you. And with that, Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. Frankly, Chair, I'm not uncomfortable with that direction that that council deal with this tonight. I mean, we remember the Indies Gas Bar, which is what is in the west end of the city, and that's what we're talking about. Effectively, what they're talking about, it seemed to me, was to remove the gas bar piece, which is why it's come to us. And as you'll note, for those in the West End, an Esso gas station, which was the Indies Gas Bar brand at that time, has gone kitty corner to that particular location, set back in a little bit on the southeast side there of that corner. And so for them to be able to then deal with their property and the one next door, as we've looked through this, I have no hesitation going forward with this process. I'm not sure that I would have a seconder for that, but I'm not uncomfortable with directing this accordingly and having it dealt with the council. I don't think, it does not feel like an unreasonable request to me.
So we have a mover. I'll go to
Point of order.
Turner. Councilor Turner?
I think that would be illegal. I think it would require public participation and notification in order to do that. So unless the mayor is suggesting that that we don't grant the ability to go to the Committee of Adjustment and then it comes back to PEC after notification.
I would seek some legal opinion on that, whether we have to go into confidential session or not for that purpose, I can't say. But I think that's worthy of understanding clearly what we're able to do or not able to do. And if that requires our legal counsel to give us an opinion on that, I would be directed accordingly.
If I can get just some clarification, we are not making a decision here. We're referring this over to the Committee of Adjustments to make the decision. If I've got that wrong, please.
No, Madam Chair.
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's Mr. Barrett speaking, and certainly if you're seeking some legal advice after, this is simply procedural. There were changes in the Planning Act that when a zoning application had been considered by council, you cannot make a change to that for 2 years, and it requires the consent of council. So in this instance, there is a zoning that has been approved on the property. There were regulation matters associated with that zoning bylaw. In reading what the request is in front of you, they've changed their development proposal, so they would be seeking some relief on some of those regulations, and that's a matter that could be addressed through the Committee of Adjustment. They have not yet made an application because, in fact, they need your permission to make that application, and that's all that's in front of you this evening. So there's no action that council can take other than to either agree that they can make an application to the C of A, or if you don't agree with that, then they would, as somebody's already noted, they would have to wait the 2 years because they can't even come back and make a zoning bylaw and an application on those same lands. So that's what's in front of you this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much. So if the issue then in front of us is giving this applicant permission to go to Committee of Adjustment, what I heard from Councillor Turner, without ever putting words in his mouth, was that this should be a Committee of Adjustment issue. Then I'm very comfortable, if this is really the direction it's intended to go, to let Committee of Adjustment deal with it with our consideration that we would allow them to look at it as a result of a change of use. And if it's a result of a change of use, which is again eliminating the gas bar component, why would we have an issue with Committee of Adjustment reviewing it ahead of the prescribed timeline? It just does not seem unreasonable to me.
I guess through the chair, I think there was.
I got that right, Mr. Barrett?
Well, sort of, if I may, through the chair.
All right.
Under the new rules that came in, once there's a decision of council that's been made with respect to a zoning bylaw, that can't be changed for 2 years. And that, so the council's decision, and so I believe the reasoning behind that was because very often it takes more than 2 years for property go through the process of development after it's been zoned. But also, it was also that essentially they didn't want decisions coming that were second guessing decisions of council right away. What was offered in the legislation as relief from that is exactly what's in front of you this evening, which is the applicant can come to council and say, you can't deal with this for 2 years. That's what the law says. But I could, with your permission, go to the Committee of Adjustment to deal with some changes. And all I'm asking you, given that it was your decision and it's not supposed to be changed for 2 years, are you okay with this going to another committee to look at this matter that could possibly change that? That I think is, in a nutshell, is what's here, and that's what's intended. So they're seeking your permission because it was your decision, and your decision is supposed to stand for 2 years. And they're saying, well, notwithstanding that your decision is supposed to stand for 2 years, are you okay with giving us permission to go to the Committee of Adjustment to deal with a development matter? And that's what's in front of you tonight.
Mr. Mayor.
Chair, that's what I thought I said, but I thought Mr. Barrett said it much more eloquently, but I thought that's exactly what I intended. If for any reason there's any confusion, I'm prepared to focus it back to that point that would allow a Committee of Adjustment to review the council decision based on the change of use. And so with that, I'm in agreement with Mr. Barrett's understanding, and I would move that the applicant have the ability to go to Committee of Adjustment by virtue of the change of use consideration, which was not considered at the time by virtue of the circumstance at the time. And I think new circumstances should always allow a reconsideration if, as and when it makes thoughtful sense.
So if I may interrupt here, just so we can stay with the motion. If we can have the motion read out again, I'm feeling that the motion in front of us is clear, that we are making the decision here to refer this to the Committee of Adjustments to determine what needs to be changed. And I want to make sure that's clear, that that is the ability that we have that's in front of us. If we are going to start making changes, I think we have to be really careful what's being asked of us and then adding to that. And I want to, again, remind committee members that this has come to us because there is this decision, there is this change that is being made within the 2 years to when the original application was approved, and they need to make a change, but they need our consent to move it over to the Committee of Adjustments for them to deal with. And if I may go to the clerks, just to read the motion in front of us. Do we have a mover and a seconder on it? Okay. One more time with what's in front of us.
That the following actions be taken with respect to the property located at 1919 West, Part A. On the recommendation of the city clerk, the report dated December 13th, 2021 and entitled Request for Council Resolution under Section 45 bracket 1.4 bracket of the Planning Act 1990 CP 13 1919 to 1929 Oxford Street West be received for information, and Part B, the request to accept a minor variance application relating to the property located at 1919 to 1929 Oxford Street West be approved.
We've got a mover and a seconder. And with that, we can vote.
Chair, I'll say yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving on, next up is the deferred matters list. If we can receive this. Any comments, committee members? Do I need a motion? I'm looking for a motion. Councillor Lewis and Councillor Lehman. Councillor Turner.
I wasn't on committee at the point when this came, so my memory is a little foggy. But the Q4 2022 identification for the bird-friendly stuff, is that the timeline that had been identified when it had been brought forward to committee in the last session?
I'm pretty sure it was, but I guess you're looking for staff to confirm that.
If that's what it was, I'm satisfied. It seems like a long time, but I recognize it's the most recent thing to be put on the deferred matters list. But it seemed like something that had been brought up well earlier, as for it to be put towards the back of the list, despite it having been brought up earlier than had been formally passed at in the last session of PEC. That's all I'm looking for. But if 2022 Q4 is the earliest that it can happen, I can appreciate that.
Thank you. And just to add to that, I know the council did approve the information going to the advisory groups, to I think EPAC and LWAC, for comments as well. So there could be that process. But with that, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to perhaps assist a little bit for Councillor Turner this was some direction that was provided after Mr. Samuels made his presentation to PEC last month. So that's where this particular item arose from. And as I wasn't on planning prior to that year, I'm not sure if there was something earlier, but that's where this one came from.
Thank you. Councillor Turner?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Yeah, that's the most recent iteration was that, but it had been brought forward long before that. So that's why I was seeking the clarification. But I appreciate that that context. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, can we go to vote?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
We're moving on to the next item. I just want to make sure, because we did some flip-flopping around here. We're confidential 6.1, and I wonder if I can go to the clerk for what we're going to go in confidential for.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The committee is going into closed session to consider a report in a meeting closed to the public, as the subject matter being considered pertains to advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose from the solicitor and officers and employees of the corporation. The subject matter pertains to litigation or potential litigation with respect to an appeal at the Ontario Land Tribunal, and for the purpose of providing instructions and directions to officers and employees of the corporation.
Thank you. And with that, I'm looking for a mover and a seconder to go in camera. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Lewis.
Chair, I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. To make some changes.